Chapter 481. Xiaomu also knew that there was no reason for her to vent her anger. What did this have to do with Lady Holy Water? It had always obediently stayed in the Holy Water sect and didn't go out to cause trouble. It also never revealed its true form in front of others. In the end, human nature was still scary. But she, at least right now, she couldn't see this drop of water at all. She really didn't want to see it. The sapling waved its two branches and dragged Lady Holy Water over. Without any explanation, it slapped Lady Holy Water's head. "What are you yelling for? Can't you see that Master is in a bad mood?" After saying that, it kicked the water baby's butt and gave it a look. Lady Holy Water sobbed and ran pitifully a few steps away. Sparkling water droplets gurgled out and converged into a trickle that flowed into the stream and into the Emerald Lake. "Master, well..." The water baby moved its short legs and pitifully turned its small head to look in the direction Arbor was lying on. "Master, Master!" The sapling jumped in fright. It turned out that Arbor had suddenly closed its eyes and didn't say anything. It was as if it had completely fainted, and it anxiously paced around on the spot for a while. The water child rolled all the way back with gurgling sounds and melted into a ball of blue water, rubbing itself against Xiaomu's body. "Chio, did Master faint from anger because I was useless?" The sapling gloomily glanced at it. It originally wanted to beat it up to vent the stuffiness in its chest, but after thinking it over, beating it up was completely unreasonable, so it dropped the matter. The sapling picked up Arbor with its branches and casually used them to weave a more comfortable hammock for her before placing her inside. The pair of black bean-like eyes on the branch stared fixedly at its master for a while before letting out a long sigh. "Dottie, don't blame Master." "I don't blame her. She's just too sad. Let her rest for a while. I know she can recover. She definitely will." The sapling patted the water blob. The water blob emitted a faint blue light and bounced on the ground with gurgling sounds. "Master, what's wrong?" "She's fainted from overexertion of her conscience," the sapling softly exclaimed, then patted the branch and said, "But this might be a good thing. Let's go. Let's not disturb Master's rest. Go help me clean up the remaining fellows on the snow-capped peak." Little Tree's body emitted a vicious aura. "Kill them." A strange scene appeared above the Holy Water Sect's 5 peaks. Branches suddenly drilled out of the snow without warning. Accompanied by a wisp of agile water flow, the branches were growing at a terrifying speed. Qingwan had lost count of how many mystical beasts she'd fought. Now, she was lying at Stay-Up-Late's feet, on the verge of death, waiting for the remnants of an E-prefecture to wipe her out. A sharp branch suddenly pierced through the chests of several enemies. The other 2 or 3 Ani prefecture disciples were also pierced in and out of their bodies by a strange stream of water under their watchful gazes. In an instant, blood flowed out of their 7 orifices and they fell to the ground with a loud bang. The branch dragged over the unconscious white squirrel, Chirpy, and tossed it in a paradise planet before sliding towards Qingwan again. This was because most of the E Prefecture's forces had been lured to Sky Peak by Arbor. The remaining small group only had 40 to 50 people. Chapter 482. However, it was truly an extremely tragic battle for Ao Ye's group of several dozen against more than 50 great mystic cultivators level 12 and above and 100 mystic beasts. Out of the dozens of people in the Night Pavilion's 3 teams, only 3 remained, including him. Stay Up Late did not know how he managed to descend the snowy peak. When he was shaken, he opened his eyes and saw a few familiar faces. He recognized them. They were from the 3 sects. "Little brother, how are you? Why are you here?" Daybreak Sect Master Liang Wanshan asked him anxiously, "Do you know what happened on the snowy peak?" The series of questions threw Ao Ye's mind into a daze. "Who are you?" Duan Yu abruptly pulled him up, a hint of viciousness in his peach blossom eyes. "You?" Clang! A waste token fell to the ground and everyone picked it up. Duan Yu glanced at it before releasing Ao Ye's collar. "You're one of the Crown Prince's men?" Cough, cough, cough. Ao Ye laid on the ground, so exhausted that he didn't want to move at all. He lifted his eyelids and looked up at the snowy peak. With one glance, he knew why Daybreak's sect master and the rest were so astonished. The 5 peaks had been completely wrapped up by vines and thorns. The originally snow-white peaks had disappeared, and what stood tall were intersecting branches and dense leaves. It was as if the entire snowy peak had turned into a forest of ancient vines overnight. How can this be? Aoyi struggled to get up, but Duanyu ignored him and flew up the snowy peak. Situ, he hastily followed behind him. Many people from the 2 sects also followed suit. Unfortunately, when they reached halfway up the mountain, their path was completely blocked by vines as thick as a wrist. They chopped at these branches, trying to clear a path. Everyone was puzzled, but they didn't slow down. On the other side, Imo Lien, who was rushing to the holy water sect as fast as she could, was panicking. His remnant divine conscious had been able to sense the little fellow's existence the entire time. But just now he couldn't sense anything. It was as if the little fellow had suddenly disappeared from the world. Her aura had completely vanished from the world. 7th Yin knew that his master was anxious, so he swung his dragon tail and dashed towards the holy water sect at a speed comparable to light. Everyone from the 2 sects had already released their Xian beasts to help them cut down the ancient vines and old trees that were blocking their way. They wanted to open up a path to the sect master's peak as soon as possible. Suddenly, he heard a dragon's roar. When he looked up, he saw the crown prince standing on the back of the golden dragon, facing the wind. He was circling around the area full of ancient vines, as if he couldn't find a place to land. Duanyu forcefully waved his hand at him and transmitted a syllable, fire. A burning red flame shot out from the crown prince's hand and landed on the vines in front of Duanyu and the others, burning their way through. The speed at which the group opened up the passage increased. Under the burning flames and the ferocious push of the profound beasts, they finally forcibly opened up a path through the encirclement of ancient vines. It was just that when everyone rushed to the sect master's peak, they could not help being stunned. The peak was surrounded by branches, but it was completely empty. They didn't even see a corpse. More than half of the snowy peak had already been flattened, and only a few remaining buildings could be seen. When they looked over, they saw the desolate sight of broken branches strewn across the ground. Chapter 483. Jojo. Mo Lien pressed down on the golden dragon, and the human and beast both landed on the snowy peak. Everyone chopped at the surrounding vines to create a place for them to stand. Mo Lien clenched his fists and stood there for a long time. He released his consciousness, but he couldn't sense his darling's presence. She really disappeared. She really disappeared. How could this be? Mo Lien was completely flustered. He thought he sensed wrongly. However, reality proved that even though his consciousness had spread out so far and searched from top to bottom, front to back, he still couldn't sense her existence. Master, she's not here. The young 7th Yin solemnly shook his head at him. 7th Yan's consciousness could cover a radius of at least 3 kilometers. So to say, his Qiao Qiao really had disappeared from the holy water sect. Mo Lien refused to give up and looked at Duanyu and the rest. No, how could she not be here? Duanyu anxiously said and abruptly turned to look at Aoyi. Where's Jojo? Aoyi was even more at a loss. I only saw him heading towards that snowy peak in the middle. When I woke up later, I was already at the foot of the snowy peak. Cough, cough. I encountered people from your 2 sections. Everyone's gazes simultaneously turned to Sky Peak, which was the most central of the 5 peaks. Mo Lien flew over without another word, burning all the branches and vines that blocked her way along the way. Everyone had decent cultivations, so they followed closely behind her and headed towards Sky Peak. Jojo! Mo Lien pulled out her sword and slashed apart several intersecting vines in front of her. After rushing up Sky Peak, she stopped in her tracks. Traces of a fierce battle could be seen on Sky Peak. Many reddish-brown pieces of flesh were left on the snowy ground, mixing with the snow. Jojo! Jojo! Their shouts didn't receive any response. Duanyu sprinted forward and threw himself beside a shallow, human-shaped pit. Come over quickly. His hand groped wildly in the snow. He felt something and dug it out of the snow. Mo Lien snatched the small piece of metal from his hand and held it tightly in her hand. Her eyes were almost about to burst into flames. It was a fragment from the little golem. Her Jojo must have been here for a while. But where was she now? She was gone. She had completely disappeared. Chow chow. Mo Lien bolted for an even higher snowy peak. His heart was extremely flustered, as if it was being tightly gripped by 5 or 6 terrifying hands. It was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. Why did this happen? Why? She was fine when they parted. Nothing had happened. His baby even smiled at him adorably. But now, when he thought of his Chow Chow, who was now alone somewhere, he panicked. His heart ached so much that it felt like it was being torn apart. He should have accompanied her. He should have accompanied her all the way. Mo Lien was filled with regret. More people are coming. Sidui looked coldly at the winding 100-person team at the foot of the snowy peak. It's people from Luotian Prefecture. Daybreak Sect Master Liang Wanshan recognized them at a glance. They want to take advantage of the situation? Then stay here forever. Duan Yu's eyes flashed with anger as he sneered. He suddenly reached out to summon his contracted beast. This was the first time everyone saw him summon a mystic beast. Its snow-white body was as large as a small mountain. 7. Seven-tailed heavenly fox? Daybreak Sect Master stuttered. He knew that this disciple of his was quite talented. Chapter 484. However, the legendary seven-tailed heavenly fox was actually a contract beast that Duan Yu had never summoned before. Chestnut, these are all your rations. Duan Yu pointed at the people from Luotian Prefecture on the mountain path. Thank you, Master. I can have a full meal now. Brutality flitted through the seven-tailed heavenly fox's eyes, and it abruptly moved its huge body, pouncing straight at the crowd on the mountain path. The bunch of idiots from Luotian Prefecture were currently dreaming of reaping the benefits of others' quarrels. They knew that the people from Shuntian Prefecture and Ani Prefecture had already arrived first. They purposely came later so that they could take advantage of the chaos when the others were almost done fighting. It couldn't be helped. Compared to Shuntian Prefecture and Ani Prefecture, their Luotian Prefecture was slightly inferior. Wealth came from danger. In order to obtain the sacred water, Luotian Prefecture's manager racked his brains and went all out. However, it was a pity that they encountered Duan Yu and Mo Lien. Two men in a fit of rage didn't have any rationality. At the same time that the seven-tailed heavenly fox suppressed them, the golden dragon also arrived in front of Luotian Prefecture's disciples with a roar. The seven-tailed heavenly fox spat out a mouthful of purplish-red lightning, which was followed by an earth-shattering blaze. Don't mention that thrilling feeling. The seven-tailed heavenly fox and the golden dragon practically killed a large portion of Luotian Prefecture's disciples in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, Duan Yu pounced on them and threw out a bunch of concealed weapons. Luotian Prefecture's manager was almost about to doubt his life. Could it be that these Yus from the lower star domain were born as monsters? They could comprehend the 5 spirits and contract such powerful beasts in a place like the lower star domain? They were much stronger than those so-called geniuses from the middle 6 prefectures. Why? Was it appropriate for them to violate the laws of the star domain? Mo Lien currently had nowhere to vent her rage. She harshly clasped the manager's neck and questioned him harshly. Tell me, why did you come to the Holy Water Sect? Where did you get the information? The steward of Luo province was on the verge of tears. He had brought a group of people here to be tortured. Sob, sob, sob. The steward of Luotian Manor, who felt that he had been wronged, hurriedly said honestly, Our Luotian Manor has planted spies in Shuntian Manor. A few days ago, we received news that there were abnormal movements in Shuntian Prefecture. After secretly inquiring about it, we learned that sacred water had appeared in the Holy Water Sect. Young master, please spare me. We're just here to pick up a bargain. We don't have any bad intentions. Shuntian Prefecture, I want all of you to beg for death. Mo Lien's eyes were filled with intense killing intent. With a gentle swipe of her slender sword, she beheaded the steward of Luotian province. Over the past few days, the citizens of Five Moon City had been living in a state of constant fear. At the Holy Water Sect's snowy peak, a terrifying commotion would occur every few days, and the thunderous rumble of a blizzard could be heard time and time again. How would the commoners dare to investigate? However, the Five Moon City City Lord, Wu Mantian, had sent people to investigate many times, but the outcome was the same every time. There was no one left in the Holy Water Sect. Such a large sect had been overturned in an instant. Wu Mantian and his wife sighed inwardly and sent people to clean up the remaining corpses of the Xianghe village's villagers and hastily bury them. Day after day, month after month, Five Moon City appeared to have calmed down, and the Holy Water Sect's incident had also been forgotten by the commoners. But in reality, in places where the commoners couldn't see, there had already been waves of bloody retribution. Chapter 485. In a secret manor in the eastern part of Seikong Planet. No one knew that this place was actually one of the larger strongholds of Shantian Prefecture on Seikong Planet, until Northern Prince Mo led people and completely cleared out this place with lightning speed. The originally beautiful courtyard was now a mess with blood all over the ground. The 100 people from the hidden pavilion were all experts above level 12, and they carried out a one-sided massacre. At daybreak, there were faint clusters of flames moving in the manor. There were more than 1,000 people in the manor, but only one was left alive. The manor lord was forced to kneel in front of a black-clothed youth with bloodshot eyes. His hands dug into the ground as he angrily shouted, "Why? Hand it over." The back figure faced him indifferently and threw down these 3 words. "Hand over what?" The manor lord glared at the person's back with bloodshot eyes. If looks could kill, that devil would be riddled with holes by now. There were more than 1,000 people in the manor. His family had more than 20 people, and they all died in the hands of these people. What did they want in a handover? "My people." The youth abruptly turned his head and stared at him emotionlessly with a pair of icy phoenix eyes. "Hand it over." The manor lord wanted to howl at the sky and cry out his grievances. He really didn't know who this youth wanted him to hand over. In these 2 years, the 2 large countries in the north joined forces with Southern Bailey to clear out Shantian Prefecture's forces everywhere. He already knew earlier that this fire would burn him sooner or later. He already led his subordinates to such a remote manor in the eastern part of the manor. So why couldn't he let them off? Thinking of his misery, tears involuntarily flowed down his old face. Now that he thought about it, his friend was right. No matter how strong the middle 6 prefectures were, it wasn't his territory after all. It was better to be careful in everything. As the saying goes, a strong dragon can't suppress a local snake. This lower star domain might not be as weak as you and I thought. Perhaps there were still a few hidden forces that were very strong. Cry? He actually had the face to cry? Compare who was more miserable? Who was more miserable? No one knew better than him how he had spent the past 2 years. Mo Lien ruthlessly kicked the manor lord's chest. "Hand it over." "Wow!" The old man spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. He clutched his chest and laughed miserably. "Devil! You devil! What do you want from me? I didn't take anything." "Devil?" Mo Lien raised his phoenix eyes and gazed at him coldly. "So, what if he became a demon? How dare you?" The captain of the hidden pavilion stepped on the old man's back. "How dare you speak so rudely to his highness? You're not going to tell me?" Mo Lien's phoenix eyes narrowed as she laughed coldly. "This solitude wants to refine the flesh and blood of your entire family, old and young, and turn them into mechanical puppets. This solitude will make you people of Shantian Palace obey orders for eternity and never be able to reincarnate." The old man's pupil shrank, and he screamed, "No, no, no. What do you want me to say? Your Honor, I didn't take anything. I didn't take anything." "My people." Mo Lien flicked her sleeve, and a heavy slap landed on the manor lord's face. "You bunch of snakes and worms from Shantian Hall. You took away my man and haven't returned it to me for 2 years. Hand it over." The old man fell to the ground. He didn't catch his breath and lay there motionless. A member of the hidden pavilion went forward to check his pulse. He turned to the crown prince and said, "He's dead, your highness." Mo Lian's cold gaze landed on him. She said indifferently, "Continue searching. This solitude wants everyone in Shuntian Palace to be exterminated." Chapter 486. The evening wind blew gently through the forest. Peach blossom petals fluttered like snowflakes and landed on the red clothes with rustling sounds. The lake was sparkling and schools of fish swam. The water and wind were cool and meandered. At this moment, a broken peach blossom petal landed on her lips. Her lips were rosy and moist, vermilion without being touched. Her crescent brows moved slightly, and she lifted her eyelids. A pair of pitch-black eyes opened slightly. "Master, you've been lying here for 2 days and 2 nights. A little treant ran over and shook its tree arms. "If you lie down any longer, little mushrooms will grow all over your body." "Chio, how long have I been sleeping?" 2 days and 2 nights. The little treant bounced a few times beside her. "Master, get up." Arbor reached out and picked up the broken petal stuck to her lips. Her ice-like eyes moved indifferently, and she turned to look at the little tree. "What am I going to do today?" "Master, there's actually nothing to do. You've planted all the seeds in the ground these days. Many medicinal plants have already started to grow healthily, and those vegetable fields can harvest several rounds of vegetables. Go and collect them." Arbor reached out and grabbed a thin book to cover her face. "I'll sleep for a while." The little tree. Guru. A small ice bead rolled to the little treant's feet. A small claw extended from the ice bead and scratched the little treant's trunk. The little treant stretched out its branches and whipped it. "Guru." The ice bead thought that it had hidden itself well and had been hiding under the little treant's branches and leaves. Occasionally, when it approached its master, it would only sneak a glance at her before shrinking back. "Don't be so sneaky." The little treant scolded in anger and amusement. "Do you think Master is stupid? She already knew that you didn't scram." "Guru, speak human language." The little treant was so angry that it wrapped its tree arms and punched the ice bead. "Master has been lying for 2 days and 2 nights. Aren't you hungry?" The little water blob asked pitifully. The little treant sighed. When it turned its head, it was suddenly stunned. Under the peach blossom trees, a red dress had long disappeared. It had been a long time since she came to this hillside. Facing the peach blossom forest, it was surrounded by a circle of green water. The peach blossom slope was full of flowers and green grass, and the fragrance was intoxicating. Xiao Mu stood in front of a nameless grave, not moving an inch for a long time. Her slender and straight figure stood in front of the grave. Under her fierce red clothes, her slender fingers poked out of her sleeves. With a move, 2 jars of wine appeared in her hands. After slapping open the wine seal, Xiao Mu took a sip before turning the wine jar upside down, mixing the wine into the soil. "Fellow disciples, Jojo will drink first as a sign of respect." "Master." The little treant skipped all the way over. "Master you? Have I not been here for a long time?" The sapling grunted sullenly. "Master, ever since you buried the Holy Water Sect disciples here, you haven't set foot here." "Chio, how long have I been here?" "It's been a long time, Master. It's already been a little over 2 years." The sapling stretched out a branch and gently tugged at her sleeve. Its heart ached when it saw its master like this. Arbor walked forward a few steps and arrived in front of a coffin sealed in ice. Separated by a thick layer of ice, she indifferently gazed at Su Shanshan, who was lying inside. With a move of her finger, a peach blossom was placed on top of her ice coffin. Chapter 487. "Master, you should go out now," the sapling said weakly. Looking at its little master who was gently caressing the ice coffin, its tree-like face almost scrunched together. "The sun rises and sets, day after day. Master, you've already stayed here for more than 2 years. Other than the first 6 months when you advanced your conscious in your sleep, after that I always felt that you were no different from sleeping when you were awake. It was lifeless. No, it seemed to be world-weary." "Chio, Are you disappointed in me? Arbor murmured softly. The sapling shook its sharp tree head like a rattle drum. No. Chocho will always love Master so much. Don't hang out with that blob of water in the future. Its tone was becoming more and more similar. Arbor stood up and walked towards the treehouse she lived in. She skillfully climbed up her treehouse and carried the little white squirrel out. As usual, she fed it a few mouthfuls of medicinal liquid and stroked its round belly. In these 2 years, the little squirrel hadn't woken up again. 2 years ago, the fatal blow from that middle-aged mystic cultivator from Ani Prefecture had nearly shattered all the bones in the little white squirrel's body. After that, she had stitched the little squirrel up needle by needle and poured the precious medicinal liquid into its stomach like it was plain water. In these 2 years, although its condition had improved slightly, it still hadn't woken up. Hence, Chow Mu fed it the medicinal liquid every day, feeding it 3 meals a day. Chocho, don't forget to feed it medicine in the future. Arbor wrapped the little white squirrel up and put it in the treehouse. On the other end, a cyan blue chick flew onto her arm with a quack. Arbor stroked its fur in passing, but before she could speak, she heard the sapling Chocho shriek and howl. Master, where are you going? Why do you need Chocho to feed you medicine? Master, you can't be thinking of? Master, don't die. Master, you can't go and commit suicide. I won't let you die. Chocho won't let Master die. Once Chocho started crying, the little water ball immediately burrowed out from under the leaves on its head. As soon as it saw Arbor, it started to cry pitifully. It looked like a blob of water wanted to get close, but didn't dare to. It cried pitifully, Master, Master, don't die. I'll leave. I'll leave now. Arbor looked at the 2 little ones speechlessly and punched the little Trent's little head. Who wants to die? The little Trant and the little water ball sobbed for a while before they suddenly stopped crying and said in unison, Master, are you going to die? Arbor simply couldn't be bothered to talk to these 2 idiots. I'm going home, Arbor said indifferently. In the future, I may not come to Paradise Planet every day. The heavy responsibility of taking care of Chirps will be handed over to the 2 of you. Master, the little Trant and the little water ball hung on her lapel, one above and one below. They exclaimed in unison again, You're going out. What? You don't want me to leave this place? Arbor asked dryly as he leaned against a tree branch. This place is indeed quite good. It's carefree, aloof from worldly affairs, and has no worries. Master, of course I'm going out. Arbor slowly took out an iron tablet from his chest and looked at it coldly. I still have to go settle accounts with them, don't I? Even if I'm the only one left in the Holy Water Sect. It's still the Holy Water Sect. As long as I don't die, the Holy Water Sect will rise again one day. Chapter 488. It was just that she was in too much pain and wanted to escape too much. If she went out now, she would definitely see the wretched scene of Sky Peak's dilapidated walls. Because the sapling only dragged her into Paradise Planet, she would still be on the Holy Water Sect Sky Peak when she came out. She didn't want to, nor did she dare to go out. She even loathed this ugly world. If she could, she really only wanted to peacefully live out her life on Paradise Planet by herself. However, a bellyful of hatred might not be able to calm her heart. The entire Holy Water Sect's 800 disciples had one life. One day, she would make them pay for this debt one by one. No one should think of having an easy time. Now, I'll start with you. Arbor tightly clenched the iron tablet in her hand, wanting to crush it. She had repeatedly checked this iron tablet she picked up from the shattered Holy Water Sect's ancestral hall. The name of Guanlon City's Qin Estate was engraved on the back. Qin Estate, now what did it have to do with those people from Shuntian Prefecture? Or could it be that Shuntian Prefecture's power was hidden within Guanlon City's Qin Estate? That stooped old man who appeared in Dwelling Valley. Did you die or not? If you didn't die, then are you prepared to have your bones ground to dust and your flesh to be devoured by me? Wrapped in a flapping red dress, she was like a ball of vengeful blood, scarlet and dazzling, directly pressing against the sun and moon. Ka! Weak little chicken jumped on her shoulder and rubbed against her head. Don't go out either. Stay here obediently, Arbor said faintly as she patted weak little chicken's chubby body. Back then, Qingwan challenged 100 beasts alone and was incomparably brave, but it was heavily injured. Although she slowly recovered these 2 years, Arbor still had some psychological trauma. Caw! Speak human. The sapling grumpily slapped weak little chicken's head. Why did this bunch of heart-crushing scoundrels always like to grumble and refuse to speak human language? They had to find the right target even if they wanted to act cute. Didn't they know that Master was an oddball who disliked cute things the most? Master, I'll send you there. I can fly fast. Newbie flapped its wings and shouted. There's no need. It's been so many years. A few days won't make a difference, Arbor said calmly. I'll go to 5 Moon City and buy a horse. The water ball shrank and hid behind the little treant, not daring to say anything. On top of the mist, 2 round eyes looked at its master cutely. Arbor suddenly beckoned to it. The little water blob immediately flew over excitedly and threw itself into her arms. I'm sorry. She had long known that her anger was completely unreasonable. It was just that during that period of time, she really didn't want to see that blob of water. Could the holy water really make the people of the 6 constabularies so obsessed? Little Master is finally not chasing me away. Wow! The little water blob felt wronged and happy at the same time. Just as it was about to burst into tears, it saw its little master quickly take out a big bottle. The little treant was speechless. All of a sudden, the water blob held back her tears. Yes, for some reason, when she saw that big bottle, the water blob didn't want to cry anymore. Arbor looked at her regretfully and put away the bottle in her hand. She turned to the little treant and said, Send me out. The little treant immediately nodded with tears in its eyes. It had waited for so long for its master to finally let go and walk out. Just let go? The word let go was easier said than done. Once the seed of hatred was buried in the heart, it would grow stronger day by day. Chapter 489. When Arbor appeared on Sky Peak again, she couldn't help but be startled by the scenery before her. Ancient tree vines intertwined together covered the entire Sky Peak. Arbor's slender hand pushed aside the 2 vines blocking her way and squeezed through the intersecting vines. As far as the eye could see, the entire holy water sect was enveloped by the sapling's vines. Arbor stared blankly for a while before suddenly feeling her wrist heating up. When she looked down, she saw the jade bracelet carved with a pine tree suddenly emitting a lustrous light. Arbor raised her left wrist and saw a strong light abruptly activate. As if receiving some sort of response, a circle of fist-sized jade talismans flew up with a whoosh from where the ancient vines intertwined around the snowy peak. The circular jade talismans gathered into a ball and rapidly flew to Arbor's fingers. They glowed faintly and vibrated lightly. Arbor reached out to hold it, and her eyes flickered with disappointment. How could those people from Shuntian Prefecture and Ani Prefecture find the treasure pavilion? It turned out that at the critical juncture that day, the Maple Pavilion had already been enveloped by a talisman matrix. All the secret techniques and mystic weapons that the Holy Water Sect had passed down over the past 300 years had been stored inside the jade talismans. Until she appeared. Arbor touched the lustrous jade bracelet on her left wrist, which was also where the key to the Maple Pavilion was located. Without this key, all of the Maple Pavilion's inheritance would probably be buried under the snowy peak forever, never to see the light of day again. Thinking about it, she really was proud and aloof. She would rather die in glory than live in dishonor. Even if the entire Holy Water Sect was razed to the ground, those people could forget about obtaining any benefits. Cho-Cho, put it inside, okay? Yes, Master. The sapling knew that its little master would definitely be in a bad mood after coming out. So it hastily agreed and extended its branches to encircle the faintly glowing spherical jade talisman matrix in Arbor's hand. Master, I can build a wooden pavilion, the sapling said hurriedly. Little Tree said hurriedly, although it might not be the same as the Maple Pavilion of the past. At least it looks like it. Arbor nodded faintly. As you wish. After the maple pavilion was dragged into Paradise Planet by the sapling, the jade bracelet on her left wrist stopped resonating with it. It dimmed slightly and remained dormant on her wrist. Arbor reached out and caressed it again, looking up at the sky covered by the ancient vines. Only a tiny bit of sunlight could be seen seeping in through the gaps between the leaves. Little dots of light landed on the ground, making the whole environment look very gloomy and gloomy. Murong Sun, I'll be of marriageable age in 3 months, Arbor muttered to himself. With a slight movement of his body, he drilled out from between the vines and landed lightly on the snowy peak. Xiao Mu's seemingly slow floating speed actually took no more than a few seconds before her slender figure landed at the foot of the mountain and entered Xianghe Village's range. Xianghe Village was desolate and devoid of any signs of life. Along the way, they saw that the ground was covered with withered leaves, and only a stretch of dilapidated walls remained. At this moment, a few soft voices suddenly came from behind the collapsed house. Arbor was startled. She hadn't seen anyone for more than 2 years, so she subconsciously still didn't want to see people. The holy water sex area had long been deserted, so why would there be voices? In the blink of an eye, her petite body had already disappeared from where she stood. When she reappeared, a pair of lonely and dark eyes landed on the small slope behind the dilapidated walls. Chapter 490. There were 4 people sitting there, a typical adventure team. The 4 of them were currently roasting some simple food around a fire. One of them sighed and said, "Life has been getting harder and harder recently. I heard that City Lord was already given the order to start moving the city today. All of 5 Moon City's people will be migrating to the northern fortifications. We can't grow anything. If this continues, the entire city's people will starve to death." Sigh. Another person heaved a long sigh and used the branch in his hand to poke at the fire, poking a short and fat boy beside him. "You punk, what are you spacing out for?" The short and fat boy's bald head was barren, and his body was as round as a ball. His face was fair without a beard, and he was carrying a large iron pot on his back. "What's wrong? You've been spacing out?" "Nothing." The short and fat boy picked up a small piece of sweet potato and fiddled with it. After a while, he raised his head and said, "Eldest brother, I came here when I was young." "Came to the Holy Water Sect?" Eldest brother was taken aback, but then he asked with a smile, "When was that?" "Several years ago, I guess." The iron pot boy scratched his bald head and smiled honestly. "At that time, I was young and didn't know any better. I even pretended to be a girl and came to the Holy Water Sect to participate in the test." After the 3 brothers were taken aback, they abruptly burst into loud laughter. "You brat, you're really ingenious." Second brother slapped his bald head and laughed heartily. "What are you laughing at?" The iron pot boy slapped their hands away and pursed his lips. "At that time, at least I could eat my fill and wear warm clothes in the Holy Water Sect. Moreover, the 3 sects were so powerful and everyone yearned for them. I also wanted to go. And then, you. And you even passed the test?" "Eh, what are you talking about?" "Don't say it. I did pass the test." The iron pot boy raised his head, and a bright smile appeared on his white, dumpling-like face. "Xiao Zhang, don't brag. It's not like I don't understand the market. I heard that at that time, although the Holy Water Sect opened its gates to accept disciples every few days, the number of people who could pass the Holy Water test every year was very few." "What am I bragging about? I did pass," Zhang Yu said angrily. "At that time, I was chosen by the 3 Peak Masters. Alas, in the end, we were still exposed by the first Peak's Peak Master Muro. My father and I were thrown out." Zhang Yu poked at the flame and sighed. "Come to think of it, it's quite an interesting memory. My father has already been gone for 2 years." Seeing that he was a little sad as he spoke, everyone couldn't help but reach out and pat him on the shoulder. "These days, who knows when it will be our turn." "Second brother, don't say such unlucky things." All right, let's hurry up and finish eating. We'll go up the mountain to take a look. Although the Holy Water Sect has been sealed off, I don't know if we can dig up some food from the snowy peaks." "Yeah, I remember that in the past, the villagers of Xianghe Village often went up the mountain to look for food. It said that the animals and plants on the mountain didn't mutate much, and the wild mushrooms they dug up could be eaten casually. Mushroom? Oh my, don't say that. I'm about to drool. While the four of them were laughing and fooling around, they suddenly felt a gust of wind sweep over and instantly rolled them out. The fire was also completely extinguished. Don't go up the mountain. An icy voice shattered in their ears like jade beads falling onto a plate. Chapter 491. I'll let you go on account of your relationship with the Holy Water sect. Leave quickly and don't come back. After the icy voice rang out again, another gust of wind swept over and directly pushed the four of them out of Xianghe village's entrance along with their bags. The four of them broke out in a cold sweat. They crawled up and hastily retreated from Xianghe village's vicinity without saying anything. They didn't stop until they were very far away. They looked at each other in panic. We really had a narrow escape just now, one of them said while wiping his cold sweat. Another person nodded and looked at Zhang Yu with a complicated expression. Little Zhang, if it weren't for your story that touched that expert's heart, we wouldn't have been able to escape. We probably wouldn't have been able to return today. That terrifying aura just now made them feel lingering fear even now. From that voice, the girl didn't seem to be very old, but her cultivation was simply astonishing. Sure enough, a large sect was a large sect. No matter how many people had destroyed it, the remaining power was not to be underestimated. Go, go, go. Eldest brother, we should leave quickly. They were kicked out after hearing a voice and didn't even see who came. How would they dare to linger any longer? They hastily packed up their things and left in a hurry. Zhang Yu looked back at the Holy Water sect's mountain gate entangled in vines and sighed deeply. Not long after the four of them left, Arbor's smoke-like figure stood there indistinctly. She gazed icily in the direction they left. Just now, she had the intention to kill. However, just as she said, Zhang Yu's words caused her heart to waver slightly, and her entire body softened. 60 ebony talismans floated from her fingertips. They hovered in the air and abruptly lit up before disappearing into thin air. Arbor left with a flick of her sleeves. After a long time, a thin and weak little mouse creaked out from the crack in the wall and ran forward without any head or brain. Suddenly, a force blocked its path and flung it away while squeaking. A formless and transparent barrier appeared for a short, while before disappearing into the air. Arbor slowly walked to 5 Moon City. The city gates were wide open, and the large group was moving at an extremely slow speed. It seemed that Zhang Yu and the others were telling the truth. 5 Moon City was currently undergoing a large-scale migration. It was just that the journey to the north was long, and they didn't know how many people would be left after the tens of thousands of people had migrated to the fortifications in the north. Arbor shook his head, passed by the crowd, and walked towards the horse shop in the city. Unfortunately, he didn't manage to buy a horse when he arrived at the stables. It was said that the wild horses that were hunted had basically gone bad, and the domesticated horses were all snatched up by the residents of 5 Moon City. Little girl, are you going north too? The boss was wearing a tattered jacket. He rubbed his hands and said, they all said that it's colder in the north this year. It's already snowed several times. I reckon most of them will freeze to death on the roadside. Arbor turned and left without saying a word. The boss looked at her back and muttered softly, she's just a little girl, yet she's so cold. Make way, make way, make way. Get out of my way. What are you doing? You're all blocking the way. Get out of the way. Berating voices rang out repeatedly. A few whips fell, causing the crowd to scream. What are you doing? An angry roar rang out. The city lord is here, Lord City Lord. The citizens shouted along the street. Chapter 492. The one who had been whipping his way over was a minor leader of the caravan. He had a ferocious and overbearing appearance, and it was clear that he was out of tune with the common people around him. Stop! Wu Mantian hurried over with 2 personal experts, narrowing his eyes as he looked at the violent minor leader. That person was the standard model of a round bumpkin. He was over 40 years old and wore a washed dark blue robe, but he had taken care of himself in a decent manner. Do you know who this daddy is? You, A trifling city lord of 5 Moon City. Dare to be insolent in front of me? 2 level 10 experts immediately walked out from Wu Montian's side. One of them grabbed Little Fatty and pulled him off his horse. Little Fatty cursed, "You're rebelling. This daddy is second manager Chi of Northern Mo's state Uncle Zheng's estate. You, a city lord, dare to touch this daddy?" "So it's second manager Chi." Wu Mantian sneered and cupped his hands towards him. "If there's anything you want to say, please say it properly. If you want to hurry, we'll make way for you. There's no need to whip people. It will scare them." "Humph." Second manager Chi snorted heavily at the sky and glanced at the 2 level 10 experts with unsightly expressions. However, he didn't dare to criticize Wu Montian's attitude any further. "Since the city lord has come to cause trouble, I won't say anything else. Please make way for me. I am making this trip for Her Highness Consort Zheng." Second manager Chi cupped his hands at the northern sky. "Our Highness is waiting for this subordinate to rush back and report." Well said, well said." Seeing that the other party had brought out some noble consort, Wu Mantian couldn't argue with him anymore. He whispered a few words into the ears of the 2 experts beside him, having them go forward and disperse the crowd of common people. Wu Lingxiu, who was only 8 years old, pouted her small mouth as she stood beside her mother. She muttered in a small voice, "Mother, I hate this person's ugly face." The city lord's wife gently tugged on her daughter's small hand, indicating for her not to speak. Arbor stood coldly at the back of the crowd. The commotion just now made the crowd even more crowded, so she stopped for a moment under the eaves of a house. At this moment, he swept his gaze over and saw that there were more than a dozen people escorting the caravan. In the middle, there were 2 wooden prison wagons. Each cart had 5, 6, 7, or 8 people locked up in the wooden huts. There were old and young people, big and small. Altogether, there were 12 or 13 people locked up. A girl of about 5 or 6 years old stood in the prison wagon, her 2 thin and weak little hands tightly gripping a wooden pillar as she stared at the people outside. The crowd began to stir. An old man beside Arbor sighed and shook his head. "Sigh. They probably went to the dark sea to catch mermen again. How pitiful. Some of them are still children." Arbor's gaze fell on the old and young people in the 2 carriages. He saw that they were all looking at the citizens outside with anticipation in their eyes. However, even Wu Mantian, the city lord, could not interfere with Consort Zheng's matters, let alone a group of ordinary people like them. If they wanted to meddle in other people's business, they had to be alive first. "Merman?" Arbor muttered to herself. The old man glanced at her, but was shocked by the appearance of the red-clothed, cold-faced little girl in front of him. The little girl was dressed in a fluttering red robe. Her waist was slim, and her lips were clean and vermilion. Her hands were tucked in her sleeves, holding a small hand warmer. She had crescent brows and starry eyes. Her pair of beautiful, pitch-black eyes were like 2 deep, swirling abysses that seemed to suck people in with a single glance. Chapter 493. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was a celestial being reborn. She had such stunning beauty at such a young age. She would definitely be a calamity in the future. Arbor only muttered to herself and didn't need anyone to talk to her. However, as soon as she opened her mouth, 2 or 3 people immediately started talking to her. "Little girl, merfolk have always lived in the waters of the dark sea. They don't come ashore easily." As soon as a man spoke, his plump wife immediately twisted his pig ears and scolded, "Look, look, look. Why aren't your eyeballs falling out? Is she beautiful? Huh? No, not beautiful, not beautiful. Wife, you're the most beautiful. The most beautiful. Don't be awkward, awkward. Ears, ears." Woo-woo, who knew if he would be struck by lightning for saying such untrue words. After the couple left, not many people paid attention to them. At this moment, the road was crowded with people everywhere. Many people were still hurriedly packing their luggage and clothes at this time and carrying baskets of things out of their homes. Merfolk have always advocated peace. However, it's said that the sea isn't calm these days. Merfolk occasionally come ashore to look for food, but they're probably caught, a scholar in green beside her continued. At this moment, Arbor's gaze met the little girl's on the prisoner carriage. She subconsciously reached out to stroke her chest. When she saw the holy water for the first time and the holy water rushed toward her body, her chest had also been like this, burning faintly like a spark. She felt a bit stuffy and uncomfortable in her heart. The little girl's eyes, which longed for the outside world, reminded her of the little girl who died in her arms 2 years ago. For some reason, she wanted to be willful. After the crowd dispersed to both sides, second manager Chi mounted his horse and led a group of people on the road with his head held high. Xiao Mu gazed coldly in that direction before suddenly flashing away. The scholar in green was stunned. He only felt that in the blink of an eye, the little girl beside him had disappeared without a trace. When he looked up again, he saw that fiery red figure standing in front of the carriages, blocking second manager Chi's path. Second manager Chi was just about to flip out, but when he saw the little girl's face clearly, his saliva ran down. His fat face drooled as he gazed at the girl. His voice, which was strangled, was so soft that it made one's hair stand on end. "Little girl, why are you looking for me? Do you want to return to Guanlan City with me? Release her." Xiao Mu coldly uttered these 2 words. Surprisingly, second manager Chi didn't get angry and even laughed out loud. This little girl is truly adorable. There was no way they would let him go. "How about this? You follow me back to northernmost capital. At that time, we can discuss this properly." "Pa!" Second manager Chi didn't even see clearly how the other party attacked. He only felt a pain on his cheek before he fell from his horse and fell to the ground. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he fell flat on his face and immediately made everyone around him laugh. "Good." Wu Lingxiu's clapping and cheering voice suddenly fell into Madame Wu's hands. Wu Montian's eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at the girl who was blocking the carriage with a look of disbelief. Wasn't that little divine physician from the Holy Water sect? The Holy Water sect's snowy peak had been enveloped by vines for the past 2 years, and no one could climb it. Where did this little divine physician come from? There was a hint of excitement in Wu Montian's eyes. The Holy Water sect hadn't been completely exterminated. There were still people in the Holy Water sect. Chapter 494. Second manager Chi spat out a mouthful of blood. He clutched his swollen face and staggered up in disbelief. The young lady just now was her? All of a sudden, second manager Chi's pupils contracted. He saw a lightning-fast figure glide past his eyes. "What are you doing?" "This is Her Highness Consort Zheng." "She." Arbor raised her hand, and more than a dozen immobilization talismans flew up and stuck to the faces of the Zheng estate servants. Intermediate level talisman, blue immobilization talisman, immobilized for half an hour. Opponents 1 level higher than the user would be immune to the effect. Among these Zheng estate servants, only 2 were level 6 mystic cultivators. The rest were body cultivators and ordinary people, so the immobilization talismans were naturally quite effective. Thus, everyone saw that those fellows who had been baring their fangs and brandishing their claws just now all maintained a fixed position, standing there with a dazed expression on their faces. "Why you? What kind of witchcraft did you use?" Second manager Chi's shrill voice rang through the air. He covered his face with one hand and pointed at Arbor with the other shakily. "Why you dare to offend our Zheng estate? Little bitch, aren't you afraid of death?" Arbor ignored the hooting second manager Chi and walked to the prison carriage without minding her own business. An intermediate-level Vajra talisman floated in front of her. This was one of the new intermediate-level talismans she learned after opening the 4th Jade Slip. After activating the Vajra talisman, it could make parts of the body as hard as Vajra and indestructible. That's why, when Xiao Mu's hands gave a light tug and crushed the 2 large copper locks into powder, like she was crushing tofu, second manager Chi's eyeballs nearly popped out of their sockets. Heavens, that young lady's hands look white and tender, bright and flawless. How can she be so formidable? "Come." Arbor reached out and helped the little girl out of the cage first. The 13 mermen filed out in a line. They were somewhat frightened and uneasy, and there were more or less injuries on their bodies. "I'm going to Shijia City. I can send you guys to the vicinity of the Dark Sea on the way, Arbor said indifferently. Thank you, young lady. Thank you, young lady. An old woman who looked older among the 13 mermen repeatedly thanked Arbor gratefully on behalf of the group of mermen. How dare you? Second Manager Chi glanced at his subordinate who had been immobilized on the spot and angrily stomped his feet. He angrily said to Arbor, You dare to offend Her Highness Consort Jung? In order to catch these mermaids, he had been lying in ambush for more than half a month. Now all his previous efforts had gone to waste. Initially, he thought that by offering these captured mermen to Consort Jung, he would be able to elevate the status of his entire family in the manor. But now, all the beautiful dreams had come to an end. This unknown little girl who came out of nowhere actually released all the mermen that he had captured with great difficulty. How preposterous! Arbor abruptly turned his head and stared coldly at Chin Lai with his soul-cold pearl eyes. Second Manager Chi was scared silly on the spot, and he shuddered in a daze. He only felt that the girl's glance made him feel fear and shudder from the depths of his soul. I'll give you 3 breaths of time to leave. Otherwise, Arbor's cold gaze swept across his face. You can stay here forever. She only wanted to release the mermaids, not kill them. However, if this fellow with the surname Chi continued to be so noisy, there was no guarantee that she would not change her mind. Second Manager Chi was also a smart person. He glanced at the little girl's small, white jade-like hands. Chapter 495. He knew very well that he was not even worth a fart in front of this little girl. How could a girl who could knock him off his horse with a single slap be an ordinary person? Although he was unwilling, a wise man knew better than to fight when the odds were against him. Second Manager Chi hastily mounted his horse and hurriedly rode away, abandoning his subordinates who were standing on the street. Everyone laughed behind him, but Second Manager Chi pretended not to hear them and ran out of 5 Moon City with all his might. As he ran, he thought hatefully, I must report this matter to State Uncle Zheng when I return. After Second Manager Chi left, Wu Mantian walked toward Arbor with a smile and cupped his hands. Little divine physician, we meet again. Arbor saw Wu Mantian's family of 3 early in the morning and only nodded at him. If it's convenient, can I borrow a carriage? An hour later, Arbor's group left 5 Moon City. It was not that she had to follow Wu Mantian's group, but there were too many people migrating from the city, so at a glance, she saw that they were basically all people from 5 Moon City. The people in front all had carriages and horses. The further back they went, the more impoverished the elderly, the women, and the children. Wu Mantian's family of 3 was at the back of the group to take care of these women and children. Wu Mantian specially allocated a rather spacious carriage for Xiao Mu, which was more than enough to accommodate a dozen or so people. The driver was a merman over 50 years old. It was said that he often moved on the ground and was also an expert at driving carriages. The older woman was called Long Xinghua. It was said that the surname Long was the royal surname of their merman race. However, according to Long Xinghua herself, she could only be considered a side branch of the royal family and was worlds apart from the orthodox royal family. Once they conversed, the merman realized that Miss Qiao was a taciturn person. Basically, she would not respond to any of their words. However, they liked this savior very much, especially the little girl, Long Xianxian, who was Long Xinghua's granddaughter. She kept sticking to Arbor, holding her arm and sniffing her scent with her little nose. The merman girl at the side laughed. Xianxian, why are you always sticking to your savior? Big sister smells really good. Long Xianxian pulled Arbor's hand and said, Little girl, thank you so much for saving us. Arbor also realized that most of the mare folk were chatterboxes. This was especially true for Granny Long Xinghua, who had already thanked him 18 times. Arbor suddenly looked at Granny Long. Why did those people capture you? Why are you locked up in the prison wagons? The people Second Manager Chi caught were all women and children of the Merfolk clan. They were both young and old. 2 or 3 boys were also quite young, so their strength was naturally weaker compared to adults. Alas! Speaking of this, Long Xinghua could not help but sigh. In the past few years, I don't know who spread this rumor. It is said that as long as one consumes the pearls in our mermaids and mermen, he or she will be able to live forever. Long Xinghua smiled bitterly and said, "Actually, among us mermen, there is less than 1 in 10,000 who can produce a merman pearl in our bodies. It is impossible for most mermen to have sharp pearls." Arbor nodded. "They don't know?" "No, they know." Long Xinghua sneered. "However, they are unwilling to give up and feel that they must dissect us to see if we have sharp pearls." Chapter 496. So, that second manager Chi dragged you all to the Mo Kingdom Capital 4? To dissect the merfolk pearls in your bodies. Arbor didn't finish speaking, but all the merfolk present understood her meaning. Nodding, Long Xinghua smiled sadly. These people believe the rumors without a doubt. But this rumor has already been circulating for over 100 years. It's just that it's been spreading more and more recently. The capture of merfolk is becoming more and more frequent. It's said that it's all for the Mo Kingdom Capital's peerlessly beautiful Her Highness Zheng. A mermaid beside Long Xinghua said softly. Arbor had already heard people mention that Her Highness Zheng more than once. The Mo Kingdom Capital's Her Highness Zheng could slaughter so many merfolk without hesitation for the sake of enhancing her beauty, vainly attempting to obtain the merfolk pearls in other people's bodies. That this woman must be as beautiful as a rabbit silk flower on the outside, but as venomous as a viper and scorpion on the inside. That second manager said that if the merfolk pearls leave the body, they'll lose their effectiveness in less than an hour. So they want to bring us back to the Mo Kingdom Capital's Guanlan City first before dissecting the merfolk pearls in our bodies. The mermaid said pitifully, "But we're all very clear that we don't have merfolk pearls in our bodies." Granny Long also sighed. "Recently, monsters have been rampant in the water and charged into our village. We had no choice but to come ashore to forage for food. Who would have thought that someone would lie in wait for us to walk right into their trap? That Her Highness Zheng's heart must be especially vicious. These 2 years, the number of our clansmen who died at her hands is at least 800, if not 1,000. Arbor couldn't help but click her tongue inwardly. For the sake of her beauty, Consort Zheng could be considered to have stopped at nothing. After the carriage left Pony Town, the flow of people started to thin out. Some of the carriages running in front already couldn't be seen, while those lagging behind couldn't catch up in a short time either. Arbor didn't pay much attention to the people migrating from Five Moon City and hurried to the nearest netherworld sea with the merfolk. This place was a tributary that would ultimately flow into the netherworld sea. The mermaids naturally knew the way in the water better than she did. Everyone thanked her profusely. Before leaving, Long Xianxian held her hand and said goodbye reluctantly. Granny Dragon gave her an emerald green piccolo as a thank you gift. She only said that if she ran into any trouble in the water, she could blow the piccolo to summon the mermaids and mermen nearby to help. After watching the merfolk leave, Arbor put the carriage into a blue ebony storage talisman. He put the piccolo into his inner world, held the reins with one hand, and mounted the horse. His wrists slowly shook the reins. The horse galloped steadily along a dirt road and soon overtook a portion of the pedestrians. Based on the walking speed of the people of Five Moon City, it would take around 20 days to reach the border of northern Mo on foot. This kind of major event of moving the city didn't have much to do with her. Since City Lord Wu had made the decision to move, he naturally had already negotiated with the northern Mo fortification to settle down the personnel. Arbor urged her horse towards Shijio City. Once the thought of returning home crossed her mind, she inexplicably felt a rush to return home. Speaking of which, when she left home, she said that she would definitely return within 3 to 5 years. She didn't expect that she would be gone for as long as 7 years. She wondered if Mother and the others were doing well in Shijio City. Xiao Lin, Xiao Sun, and Brother Xiao, who should have all grown up, it really had been a long time since she last saw them. She wondered what it would be like when they met again. Chapter 497. Along the way, all the soil she saw was scorched black and couldn't grow anything. Arbor's expression couldn't help but soften a little when she thought of the delightfully growing vegetables and fruits she planted on Paradise Planet. She basically didn't need to worry about the arrangements inside Paradise Planet now, since the sapling was in charge of it. Ever since the little tree had advanced to the middle stage of its so-called infant stage, it could easily make all kinds of arrangements on Paradise Planet. With a wave of its hand, it could make a bunch of diligent little tree ants to plant and harvest vegetables for her. Every time she saw 7 or 8 saplings running toward her and hanging all over her body, she couldn't help but feel helpless. Moreover, it was just as the little water ball had said. The current her only needed to summon the little water ball or the sapling out of her body to attack. For this reason, she even specially used holy water and tried it 2 or 3 times. The effect shocked her. Although she didn't say it, she was deeply moved. That was the origin of the 5 spirits, the power of holy water. Other people actively comprehended the 5 spirits' origins when breaking through to level 15 Great Mystic Cultivator and then completed the transition from the Mystic Realm to the Spirit Realm. Only about 1 in 10 people could complete this transition in one go. 8 to 9 people needed to comprehend the transition again and again. If other people found out about Dear Xiao Mu, this oddball, they would be so shocked that their eyeballs would pop out. She was a level 11 Great Mystic Cultivator who hadn't even touched the threshold of level 15, but in reality, she had already completed the breakthrough from the Mystic Realm to the Spirit Realm. One day, as long as she was willing to raise her cultivation, she could directly cross over to the Spirit Realm. She didn't need to comprehend anything anymore and truly didn't have the slightest bit of trouble. After nightfall, Arbor simply tied the horse to a nearby tree and had the sapling take out a handful of grass to feed it, as well as 2 peaches for her to gnaw on. She had gnawed on a piece of pork trotter for lunch today, so she was still very full now. She didn't plan on eating anything else and planned to gnaw on 2 peaches and be done with it. "Master, don't you plan on coming in to sleep?" The little water ball's soft voice rang out. "No need." Arbor started a fire and used a withered branch to stir the flames. "I haven't even seen a single zombie after coming out for so many days. I think I'll encounter a few tonight." The sapling. That his master's hands itching? "You guys rest." Arbor flew up the tree, found a thick branch, leaned against it, and adjusted his posture. Unfortunately, the corpse puppet king that she had been looking forward to the entire night did not appear. The night passed by peacefully. It wasn't until the next morning when she woke up that she was woken up by the sounds of movement under the tree. "A bunch of trash. Don't you know how to carry a sedan chair?" The sound of the whip lashing was mixed with ear-piercing screams, waking up Arbor, who was sleeping soundly. She frowned and opened her eyes. He lowered his head and looked under the tree. Sure enough, he saw a large red palanquin being carried over in a crooked manner. 4 men with thin arms and legs lifted the top of the palanquin. The palanquin tilted to the left and then to the right. A fat and fair hand reached out from behind the palanquin curtains and whipped the palanquin bearers repeatedly. "Useless people! Stop! 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 Stop right now!" The door of the sedan was kicked open and a woman jumped out, making Arbor speechless. She had a waist that was twice as thick as a water bucket and a face that looked like a fermented bun. This woman's weight was probably more than the weight of the 4 palanquin bearers combined. There was no way they could carry her. Chapter 498. Each of the 4 sedan bearers was thinner and frielier than the other, shivering in the chilly wind. Arbor's expression turned slightly strange as she watched from the tree. It was for no other reason than the fact that she actually had an old acquaintance among the 4. If that person hadn't raised his arm to reveal a small birthmark, Arbor really wouldn't have recognized him. Little Fatty Zhou Tao, the son of Quoto Village's nouveau riche. In the past, he was as fat as a calf. She really didn't expect him to be as thin as a pork rib now. Back then, little Fatty Zhou Tao was the tyrant of Quoto Village. Whenever he went out, he would have 2 or 3 lackeys accompanying him. They would either hold an umbrella for him, fan him, or serve him tea and water. But now, his former domineering air was gone, and his former lackeys were nowhere to be seen. Little fatty Zhou Tao had actually been reduced to a sedan bearer serving someone. And from the looks of it, he was even that fat woman's slave. This was truly fate making fools of people. Useless trash. The woman cursed as she sat down under the tree. With a flip of her fingers, she took out 2 white mantus. Arbor looked down and discovered that the fat ball-like woman was a level 4 mystic cultivator. The 4 sedan bearers gulped and impatiently watched the fat ball-like woman nibble on the mantus enthusiastically. The woman didn't have any intention of sharing. When she saw the 4 people looking over, she even glared at Zhou Tao. "Do you have water?" Zhou Tao untied the water sack at his waist and respectfully handed it to the woman. The woman drank a mouthful and smacked her lips. She leaned against the tree and narrowed her eyes. Before long, she actually fell asleep just like that. At this time, Zhou Tao pulled out a knife from under the sedan and shouted at the other 3 hesitant sedan bearers. "What are you hesitating for? Kill her and plunder her things, then we'll be free." "But she's a mystic cultivator. We're only normal people. She drank the water that I spiked. So she's already asleep." Zhou Tao glared at his 3 companions, exasperated at their failure to live up to his expectations. "You don't even dare to make a move? Then you're destined to be a bunch of trash." The 3 sedan bearers gulped. "Even if we kill her, we can't get her food. She put it all in her inner world. Who cares? I'm so hungry that my eyes are about to turn red." Zhou Tao shouted loudly. He pulled out his knife and slashed at the fat woman under the tree. The knife landed on her neck. The blunt knife didn't chop off the woman's head in one go. Instead, blood spurted everywhere. The woman clutched her neck in pain and opened her eyes, scaring the other 3 sedan bearers who had rushed up to her so badly that they fell to the ground. However, Zhou Tao's eyes were red as he slashed the other party's neck again and again. That ruthless look made the other 3 people tremble in fear, not daring to speak. "I'll let you beat and scold me every day. I'll let you starve me every day. I'm also a human. I'm not your fucking pig, dog, cow, or sheep." Zhou Tao's eyes were bloodshot as he desperately slashed at the woman's neck. After more than 10 slashes, the fat woman finally stopped moving and fell heavily to the ground. The 3 sedan bearers were so frightened that they scrambled to the back. Only Zhou Tao was bold enough to go up and check the woman's breathing. After confirming that she was dead, he let out a long sigh of relief. "Why you killed the Pei Estate's second madam? Will their family find trouble with you?" Zhou Tao abruptly glared at the 3 sedan bearers with a pair of fierce eyes. The 3 of them jumped in fright at the same time and hurriedly shrank back. Chapter 499. She's already dead. So what's there to be afraid of? Truly useless. Zhou Tao glared fiercely at them before going forward to rummage through the woman's clothes. The woman was indeed very cautious and didn't have anything in her pockets. He was so angry that he ruthlessly kicked the corpse. That lecherous second master of the Pei estate has long been dissatisfied with this fat ghost wife of his. Do you think he will investigate the cause of this fat pig's death and make things difficult for us? Truly an idiot. Zhou Tao's eyes reddened as he kicked the woman several more times to vent his anger. Mystic cultivators, they truly were abominable existences. They caused him to waste so much effort to kill this mystic cultivator woman, but he didn't get any benefits at all. Suddenly, his body moved, and his hair stood on end. He turned his head with a stiff neck and immediately met a pair of eyes that were even colder than ice. Who are you? He had no idea when this person appeared behind him. This kind of powerful and unpredictable situation caused all the pores on his body to open up. His eyes carried some shock as he fearfully looked at the other party. That was a cold and gorgeous little girl. Zhou Tao wasn't attracted by her appearance, but he kept staring at the other party's eyes, feeling like he had seen them somewhere before. Arbor glanced at him, and a wisp of his spiritual conscience seeped into the woman's inner world. Ever since she fell into a deep sleep for 6 months, her conscience had also taken a big step forward. At this time, her conscience had already liquefied, so the process was naturally extremely painful, but the benefits were endless. First, her mystic conscious evolved into spiritual conscious, even though she had just stepped into the first level of spiritual conscious. But she, a little girl who had yet to advance to the spirit realm and was merely a level 11 great mystic cultivator, had her conscious break through to the spirit realm first. Most people wouldn't believe this kind of abnormal advancement method. In addition, she could draw her spiritual conscious into her eyes. Not only could she clearly see the other party's mystic meridians, she could even clearly explore the other party's inner world. Just like now, she could even use her spiritual conscious to enter other people's inner worlds and rob them. The dead fat woman was only a level 4 mystic cultivator, so her inner world was rather pitifully small. There were only some miscellaneous items inside, such as 2 bags of beans and several steamed buns, so she naturally didn't care about them at all. With a flip of his hand, some of the items in the woman's inner world fell to the ground. Zhou Tao and the 3 sedan bearers saw the steamed buns and pounced forward. They picked them up with both hands and started chewing, wolfing them down. Zhou Tao was very strong. With a few punches, he snatched away the 2 bags of beans. Xiao Mu glanced at them before turning to leave, not leaving behind a single word. In such a world, people might not necessarily live like pigs, cows, and sheep. She had no interest in finding trouble with Zhou Tao. Zhou Tao called out to her from behind a few times. Seeing that she didn't even look back, he couldn't help but suck on a steamed bun and say to himself, "I've seen this girl before." The 3 sedan bearers sneered, as if they didn't believe him at all. The 4 of them stopped talking. Several days later, Arbor returned to Shijio City. However, when she arrived at Pear Blossom Alley, she discovered that the Qiao residence was already empty. There was a box on the table covered with a layer of dust. Arbor's heart skipped a beat. He opened the box and saw a thick stack of letters inside. Arbor opened the letters one by one and read them. Her entire family had written her a letter once every 3 months, filled with their longing for her. Qiao Zhongbang's most recent letter was from 2 years ago. He left a message saying that the entire family had moved to Guanlan City. Arbor swept the dust off the box with her sleeves. Chapter 500. Miss! A pitch-black figure landed in the room with a whoosh. 2 slender figures followed behind him, and both of them looked at each other with a dumbfounded expression. The captain was here again. Every 2 or 3 days, he felt that Miss had returned home, but he always came up empty. He had been disappointed countless times. The room was completely empty. Ayo, he stood in a daze for a long time until one of his subordinates poked him. "Captain, are you seeing things again?" "Impossible." Ayo, Yi shook his head in confusion. "I clearly sensed Mrs. Aura. His Highness had sent them to guard Shijio City's Pear Blossom Alley in case Miss returned one day and came up empty. Could it be that it was as they said, that he had sensed wrong again?" Ayo, Yi walked away dejectedly. Just as he was about to leave the room, he caught sight of something out of the corner of his eye. He abruptly turned around, his expression changing drastically. "Where's the box of letters on the table?" Since her parents and family had moved to Guanlan City, Arbor didn't linger in Pear Blossom Alley and left the city. Along the way, Arbor flipped through the letters when she was free. One letter after another contained her parents' and second uncle's thoughts about her. There was Brother Xiao, whose eloquent work report, and the little foodie's cute and incessant questions. When will Big Sister come back? The most interesting one was her younger brother Xiao Senator. His dog-like handwriting was truly intoxicating. Arbor put away the letters and hugged the box to her chest. She raised her hand to look at the iron tablet engraved with the words Qin Estate. In the end, she decided to go to the Qin Estate to gather information when she arrived at Guanlan City. Arbor wasn't in a hurry. She was hoping to encounter a few corpse puppets to practice her skills. She hadn't seen any corpse puppets in 2 years, so she didn't know how much they had grown. But the strange thing was, the more she looked forward to it, the more she didn't see any. She didn't know if it was because Northern Mo's governance was excellent. Helpless, Arbor could only speed up her journey. Several days later, she arrived at Guanlan City without incident. She wanted to find someone to ask for directions to the Qin Estate, but she didn't expect to see a large signboard at the entrance, attracting her attention. The Qin estate recruited 5 manservants who were proficient in pharmacology, as well as 10 maidservants who knew a bit of martial arts. A bunch of onlookers gathered there to watch, and many of them were eager to give it a try. Arbor didn't say anything and just stood in front of the notice board. Naturally, there were people talking at once about the Qin estate situation. As it turned out, the Qin estate was a well-known alchemy, aristocratic family. Its scale naturally couldn't be underestimated. No wonder the entire Guanlan city was in an uproar over the recruitment of a few servants and maids. It was better to come at the right time than to come early. Since the Qin estate was recruiting, then a moment later, a young girl with an ordinary appearance and a short cyan jacket drilled out of the small alley. She looked back and forth, and after identifying the direction, she ran in the direction of the Qin estate's main street. Stop the carriage. An inconspicuous carriage with a black canopy suddenly stopped. His slender fingers lifted a corner of the curtain and swept his gaze across the unfamiliar faces on the street. A trace of doubt flashed through his slightly raised phoenix eyes. Am I indulging in wild fantasies again? He muttered to himself. Just now, he had clearly sensed a trace of his JoJo's aura. It was his wild fantasies again. Your Highness? Let's go. The carriage curtain slowly fell, and the carriage slowly set off again. Arbor pretended to be a young girl who knew a bit of martial arts and ran with the flow of people to the Qin estate's entrance. The Qin estate's chief manager was standing on the steps and raising his voice to shout, "Line up properly. Line up properly. What are you squeezing for? Line up for me." Chapter 501. When Arbor saw that there were already 300 to 400 people in front of her, she was completely speechless. Wasn't it just recruiting a few servant girls? It was actually on such a large scale. Line up. Do you freaking know how to line up? Are you a girl? Line up over there. Guys line up in one line, girls line up in another. Don't mess around. Several servant girls came out of the Qin estate and lined up in 2 lines with wooden sticks. Damn! Why are you stepping on me? Don't push. I'm telling you, you're mine. If you push again, I'll slap you. The head manager snorted angrily. Those who were taking the servant test left. Those who were taking the servant test, right? All of you line up properly. You don't even know how to line up, scram. After a moment of chaos, everyone finally lined up in an orderly manner. The girls and boys lined up in 2 lines and took the test individually. Behind Arbor stood 2 gorgeously dressed girls with makeup. They both looked to be 17 or 18 years old. One of them pinched her orchid fingers and said, what do you think of my makeup? Will I catch the eye of the Qin estate's head manager? The other one flattered. You're beautiful enough, beautiful enough. Little sister, you're a natural beauty. Arbor silently turned her face away and suppressed the urge to vomit. Didn't this Qin estate only recruit girls who knew martial arts? Why was there a large group of orioles and swallows here, as if they were opening a brothel? I forgot to pay my nails. Do you think the Qin estate will accept me? I really want to enter the Qin estate. I heard that the Qin estate's treatment is very good. The 2 young masters in the estate are famous for their good looks in the capital. That's right, that's right. I heard that too. I heard that young Master Omega Kotoku once went out in a carriage and invited his friends to Thousand Sunset Dock for a drink. In the end, he was chased by dozens of girls, causing him to run back to the estate before he could drink. Kikik. She had come to participate in the servant recruitment test, but the girls' conversation suddenly changed to talking about the 2 young masters. Arbor turned his head speechlessly and looked at the girl who was chatting enthusiastically. Why did you chase after him? The 2 young ladies were dumbfounded. They looked at this average-looking young lady with eyes, as if they were looking at a guest from another realm. What do you mean by why? Of course, it was because the Omega Kotoku was a feast for the eyes, causing all the girls to be unrestrained. Can you give me food if I catch them? Everyone was speechless. What should I do if I suddenly feel like there's nothing to talk about? A few girls who were chatting enthusiastically looked at the little girl's cold eyes and suddenly felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over their heads. Immediately, they lost their interest in chatting. Seeing that the girls in front and behind her had all turned their backs, and were ignoring her. Xiao Mu snorted softly. 2 by 2, start the competition. Let's have a duel. If you're not doing embroidery, why are you bending your fingers like orchids? The chief steward roared. The two girls who were in the middle of testing their fists and legs suddenly let go of their reservations and pounced on each other. They pounced, clawed, and bit at each other. The steward was dumbfounded. Arbor looked at the two girls speechlessly. They clawed at each other until their faces were full of red marks. They even pointed at each other and cursed. In the end, the steward flew into a rage. He pointed at the two girls who were fighting and waved his hand. Scram! Not long after, a servant carried a huge rock from the courtyard. The steward said with a dark expression, "There's no need to fight. It was an eyesore. Girls, come forward. Only those who can lift the huge rock in one go will be hired." Ah, how can it be so heavy? The orioles and swallows cried out. Today is the 6th watch. See you tomorrow. Chapter 502. That's right. Steward, can't you change the method? A young lady in the front row twisted her handkerchief as she called out in a sweet voice. The head steward's face darkened as he glanced at the beautiful lady. The beautiful lady immediately threw him a coquettish glance, but the head steward only said one word with a darkened face. Scram. His shout was like thunder, lingering in the air. The girls were so frightened that they didn't dare to act rashly. They hurriedly went up one by one to lift the huge rock. The scene was too beautiful, and they simply couldn't bear to look at it. Arbor saw a young lady rub her fists and wipe her palms as she went up. She first used her handkerchief to wipe her sweat, then stretched out both her hands, and her entire body sprawled on the huge rock as she yelled for a long time, but the huge rock didn't move an inch. The head steward, who was standing on the steps and looking down, was sweating profusely along with a group of servants. Next, this was simply a waste of time. Head steward, let me try again. That young lady shouted as she was dragged out of the crowd by two servants. Arbor was completely speechless. This time, the young lady who went up was dressed in black and had a graceful bearing. She steadily lifted the huge rock with her hands and received a look of approval from the head steward. Very good. Go and register your name. Next, after several delicate and weak young ladies were dragged away by the servants one after another, the remaining girls began to be on edge. They really wanted to lift this huge rock and smoothly enter the Qin estate. Unfortunately, among the several hundred girls present, only that black-clothed young lady had energetically lifted the huge rock up until now, and was accepted by the Qin estate on the spot. After this black-clothed young lady finished registering, she walked to the side alone. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and calmly looked at the orioles and swallows on the field with a slightly arrogant expression. Dong, 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 dong. The loud sound of footsteps attracted everyone's attention. When they turned their heads to look, they were all speechless. They stared until their eyeballs were about to fall out of their sockets. The young lady who walked up looked to be about 25 or 26 years old. Her body was sturdy and plump, and she was at least 3 or 4 times as wide as the other young ladies. She hugged the huge rock that was half a person's height with both hands and suddenly stomped her foot, lifting the huge rock above her head. All right, the old steward called out and waved his hand at the sturdy girl. He pointed at the girl in black and said, "Go and register. Stand next to that girl." Dong, 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 dong. The fat lady's footsteps shook the heavens, causing the jaws of the surrounding women to drop. Fuck. This damn fat woman can also enter the Qin estate. Manager, recruiting such a fat woman into the manor is too much of an eyesore. That's right, that's right. It's so fat and ugly. If it's placed in the courtyard, it feels like some of the fresh air has been taken away. The steward fiercely glared at him. Don't speak nonsense. If you want to do the test, then do it. If you don't, then quickly leave. Don't block the way. The few girls who were clamoring the fiercest immediately gave up. They tried to move the boulder but failed, so they retreated to the back with their tails between their legs. With great difficulty, it was Arbor's turn to be tested. Under the powerful gaze of the steward, Arbor walked forward and put on an act of picking up the huge rock with both hands. Not long after, he pretended to be exhausted and threw the huge rock on the ground. The steward grunted and nodded. "Go over there and register. You're young, but you're quite strong. Not bad. You're useful." Arbor's small face was expressionless. He nodded and walked to the side of the table. Without thinking, he wrote down 3 words, Mu Xiao Bao. Chapter 503. Just as she put down her brush and straightened her back, she heard a pleasantly surprised cry from behind the crowd. "Aya, second young master is back." Thus, all of a sudden, those women seemed to have been injected with chicken blood as they surrounded the carriage. The servants hurriedly ran over to disperse the crowd and rudely pushed those girls to the sides of the road, making a narrow path. The head steward quickly stepped forward and bowed, personally lifting the curtain for the second young master. The Qin estate's second duke, Ziqin Xian, slowly stepped out of the carriage, and the surrounding air instantly became still. The crowd of love-struck fools looked at the Omega Kotoku young master, almost drooling. They saw the second young master wearing a plain silk gown, a dark green jade belt with a bamboo pattern on his waist, and an ink-colored wide-sleeved robe on the outside. His long hair, like flowing clouds, was slightly messy from the cold wind, but it didn't cover up his flawless, jade-like beauty in the slightest. He was truly handsome and elegant, with an outstanding temperament. As he looked around, a dark green fluorescent light faintly floated in the depths of his eyes. Xiaomu cast a glance in that direction and was immediately taken aback. His entire person seemed to have been possessed, his eyes slightly widened, and he unconsciously clenched his fists, his entire body inexplicably faintly trembling. It's him? How could it be him? Arbor fiercely suppressed his impulse to immediately turn around and run away. His entire body stiffened, and his small face was paralyzed as he stood beside the black-clothed girl, staring blankly at the Omega Kotoku young master, who was walking closer and closer to him. He walked over, and as usual, his jade eyes contained a faint, gentle smile. His pair of deep eyes seemed to be able to suck one's soul bit by bit into the abyss, filled with a strange magic. Behind him was a bunch of love-struck fools screaming, "Second young master." But Arbor turned a deaf ear to them. He looked at that slender jade-like figure walking closer and closer, his mind buzzing. He suddenly stopped in front of her. To be precise, he stopped to her left, standing directly in front of the black-clothed girl. Don't be fooled by how bold and manly the black-clothed girl was when she mentioned the stone. Now that she was being stared at by the Omega Kotoku, she immediately lowered her head shyly, and her entire body went soft. Chung Yuezhu greets the second young master. After being shy, the girl in black gracefully saluted Omega Kotoku. Omega Kotoku's gaze fell on her face for a moment, then turned to look at Arbor carefully. Noticing that he was staring at her, Arbor, all the hair on her body stood on end. Although she lowered her head slightly, every pore on her body was alert to the man in front of her. Second Qin abruptly took a step closer to her, and our dear Xiaomu immediately shrunk back reflexively. In almost an instant, she hid behind her wide and plump sister. The fat girl clenched her fists and bowed to the Omega Kotoku. "Second young master, get out of the way." Omega Kotoku glanced at the fat girl unhappily. His eyes were clearly smiling, but it made people feel a trace of inexplicable coldness. The fat sister hurriedly retreated to the side, but who would have thought that Xiaomu was like a small tail, retreating to the side with her. She still used the fat girl's huge figure to block herself. The second young master couldn't help but be angry and amused. He pointed at Arbor hiding behind the fat girl. "Who is she?" The chief steward hurriedly took the roster from the side and turned to the last page. "This is a maidservant who knows some martial arts that the eldest young master recruited. Her name is Mu Xiaobao." Chapter 504. She'll be the one. Omega Kotoku nodded and said indifferently, It just so happens that this young master killed a servant girl who didn't know her limits 2 days ago. She'll be the one. The senior manager's jaw was about to drop. This? Young master, I'm afraid this isn't appropriate. She just entered the estate and doesn't know anything. How can she serve in young master's room? She's more like a maidservant who sweeps the outer courtyard. Your entire family sweeps maidservants in the outer courtyard. Arbor poked her head out from behind the wide, plump girl and glared coldly at the senior manager. The senior manager. I'll take this stoic face. Send her to my court later. Omega Katoku threw down this sentence and turned to walk back into the estate. Bah! Who wants to go to your dogs at court? Arbor inwardly shuddered and was about to slip away when two servants ran up and looked at her enviously. Little miss, follow us. I'm not going. She only came to the Qin estate to secretly inquire about the relationship between the Qin estate and the holy water sex incident back then. But now, she actually encountered that frightening person. Of course, she didn't want to continue staying in this godforsaken place. Who wants to go with you to that whatever second young master's court? However, if she left just like this, wouldn't all her previous efforts be wasted after waiting in line for so long and even undergoing that damn test? Did the Qin estate have any connection with the Shuntian prefecture? Could that Lu Yiji be related to the Qin estate? Please, little miss. The servants looked at the hesitant little girl standing at the entrance in puzzlement. This really was a strange girl. In the Qin estate, which little girl wouldn't go crazy from joy after hearing that they were retained by the eldest and second young masters? Why was this person's reaction so peculiar? Like she was about to run away at any moment? Several servants hurriedly blocked Xiao Mu's path, using both the carrot and the stick to invite her into the Qin estate. Arbor was led to Omega Katoka's court in bewilderment. As soon as he entered the garden, he saw several red-crowned cranes pecking at their feathers, leisurely strolling around the courtyard as if there was no one around. Xiaomu looked up at the painted plaque above her head. Crane Garden. She recalled those large cranes on the Holy Water Sect's snowy peaks. When the Holy Water Sect was exterminated, those large cranes either died or left. Xiaomu reflexively walked towards one of the red-crowned cranes. Just as she was about to touch that red-crowned crane's fur with her small hand, she heard a crisp and impolite rebuke abruptly ring in her ears. Insolence! Xiaomu turned her head and saw a girl draped in a large white ferret fur cloak, which concealed half of her small, jade-like face within the white fur collar. Only her small, exquisite nose and lively eyes were exposed. Greetings, Miss Song. The two servants hurriedly bowed to the young lady, not daring to act rashly. Arbor's hand paused, and then he stroked the red-crowned crane's feathers again. His face was expressionless, and he didn't pay any attention to the angry Miss Song beside him. Who allowed you to touch it? Come, chop off her hands. Miss Song's dark face exuded a dense aura of danger. As soon as she finished speaking, two body cultivators immediately walked out from behind her and directly grabbed Arbor's shoulders. Song Yingxiu, you think too highly of yourself. Who gave you the guts to be so impudent in my garden? Omega Katoka's cold voice came from inside the room, and a gust of cold wind blew at the two body cultivators, causing them to fall to the ground. Chapter 505. Arbor took a ball-shaped fruit from the wooden bucket beside her and fed it to the red-crowned crane. She was so engrossed in playing with the big crane that she naturally didn't notice the frightened gazes of the servants beside her. In fact, she didn't even notice that Song Yingxiu had been severely reprimanded by Omega Katoku and had run away crying. She was stroking the red-crowned crane's feathers as if no one else was present. "Huh?" Omega Katoku sneered. Arbor suddenly felt a cold aura close to her body. She subconsciously patted the red-crowned crane's head and then jumped back, avoiding the second young master's outstretched hand. Omega Katoka's hand froze in midair. It was only an inch away from the little guy, but it didn't even touch a single hair. How preposterous! If you want to use this strange behavior to attract this young master's attention, then you've succeeded. The second young master was so angry that he flung his sleeves and turned around. He coldly scolded, Come with me. The red-crowned crane beside her was very intelligent. It flapped its wings and ran to the side listlessly. Arbor stood alone in the garden and looked around. She saw that the servants in the residence were all staring at her. After a while, Arbor didn't move. One of the servants couldn't hold it in anymore and shouted at Xiao Mu, "Go!" Oh, so Omega Katoka was yelling at her just now that inexplicably, it was no different from her previous life. He was just as temperamental and angry as always. If it weren't for the fact that she was unwilling to give up and wanted to sneak in and search his study, she wouldn't have bothered to stay here and be bullied. Arbor expressionlessly walked to the door of Omega Katoka's room and suddenly raised her leg to kick it. The group of servants stood far away and their eyelids suddenly twitched. Bang! A certain person was like a powerful Vajra girl, kicking down the second young master's door with one kick. Everyone was speechless in the reception hall of the Drizzle Court. A group of singers were singing, dancing, playing, and singing. Melodious music drifted in the air. A dark, purple slender figure was sitting on the head of the table. His long hair was not tied up, and it hung down to his waist like a splash of ink, like a natural waterfall. With one hand holding the cup and the other supporting his chin, he pursed his lips with a faint smile. Between her eyebrows was a natural cinnabar dot, and a pair of enchanting eyes that were filled with temptation exuded all kinds of flirtatious charm. Eldest young master, is Miss Ran of the Jade Hue House really that good at dancing? Look at you. You're not even blinking. A woman with a red shawl draped over her shoulders and half-exposed breasts snuggled up to Chin E and rested her head on his arm. She called out in a coquettish voice, her eyes filled with jealousy. First, Chin's gaze followed the rapidly spinning woman in her gorgeous pleated skirt, his eyes emitting a faint luster. Not bad indeed. A low voice slowly sounded. Young master, the second steward is here. First, Chin beckoned to the person standing outside the door, and the second steward hastily trotted in with his head lowered and waist bent. He respectfully curtsied to eldest young master. This lowly one, Chui Deji, greets eldest young master. I heard that my second brother's crane garden has been finding door craftsmen to repair the door every day these past 2 days. What's going on? The second steward's mouth twitched, and he coughed lightly before saying, Eldest young master, there is indeed such a thing. Speaking of which, it's all that darn girl's fault. She's only been in the estate for 2 days, but she's already causing a ruckus in Crane Garden. She's greatly angered second young master. Oh. First Chin narrowed his eyes slightly. What little girl? Chapter 506. When the second steward recounted the events of the past 2 days in Crane Garden, First Chin laughed heartily. What an interesting little girl. This young master would like to summon her to meet me. The pink-lipped girl leaning against eldest young, Sir Chin bit her lower lip and suppressed the jealousy in her eyes. She said softly, Eldest young sir, what's there to meet with a darn girl? At this time, the singing and dancing in the courtyard had stopped. Dressed in a red dress, Miss Ran leisurely walked forward and curtsied to eldest young Sir Chin. First Chin smiled. I originally thought that second brother would definitely honor Miss Ran's arrival with a visit, but I didn't expect that he would be entangled with some mundane affairs. Zhao Qiran curtsied to eldest young sir again and said aloofly, Qiran is just a prostitute and doesn't deserve second young sir's deep affection. Miss Ran is truly too modest. Who doesn't know how many marquises were stunned by Mrs. Moondance? Eldest young sir said with a smile. Zhao Qiran had a faint smile on her lips, but there was a faint disappointment in the depths of her eyes. Seeing this, First Chin's lips curled into a meaningful smile. TSK, this Miss Ran of the Jade Clay Pavilion, who possessed a graceful and lofty bearing and was unobtainable by any aristocrat, has actually given her heart to my second brother just because of a chance encounter. It's truly very interesting. The recent days had been so boring, so he had to find something for his second brother to do inside the study in Crane Garden. Eldest young sir thought that his second brother had nothing to do, but who would have expected that, That handsome and elegant Omega Katoka young sir was currently glaring angrily at a certain person standing in front of the study table with a dark expression. He reprimanded, "You can cause such a commotion in the study just by grinding ink. The entire room is filled with the ink you spilled. Am I someone who does this kind of rough work? What a joke." The senior steward said that I'm suitable for sweeping the outer courtyard. "Young sir, please transfer me out," the little girl said expressionlessly. The senior steward, who had just entered, nearly knocked his head against the door frame. His mouth twitched, and he coughed lightly. "Young sir, this old servant has brought Miss Kaiwei here." Just in time, Omega Katoku reached out and pressed his throbbing head. "Kaiwei, bring her back to your place and teach her well. Teach her for 2 days and then send her back to me. Don't do all these weird things all day long. This was how it should be." This girl had just entered the residence, so what could she possibly know? The head steward smiled so widely that his eyes could not be seen. He waved his hand to let Kai Wei bring Arbor away. Kai Wei curtsied, but just as she took a few steps closer to Xiao Mu turned around and walked outside without a word of farewell. Omega Katoku was so angry that she threw a teacup. She felt that something was wrong with her for the past 2 days. It was as if she was looking for trouble. Ever since she brought this stoic face back, she hadn't had a day of comfort. But for some reason, when he saw this little stoic outside the door for the first time, there was an especially strong voice in his heart telling him, "Bring her back, bring her back, bring her back." "Stop right there," Kai Wei shouted angrily after exiting the young sir's study. Arbor rubbed her arms. She only felt some warmth after coming out of that person's study and being bathed in the warm sunlight. That person was actually the Qin Estate's second young sir. The shadow of her past life was still vivid in her mind. She didn't expect that they would cross paths so quickly in this life. She had never come to Guanlan City in her past life. At that time, she was tormented by Fan Shioha to the point where she was on the brink of death and was carried out of the secret room by this young Sir Omega Katoku. Chapter 507. She was unconscious for a few months before she slowly regained some of her strength. At that time, this master of the Omega Katoku, who had raised her like a small animal, would come over to tease her when he was happy. If he was unhappy, he would leave her there for 2 days and 3 nights, starving her to the point that her eyes almost turned white. In order to tame this little pet of his, this master had tried to starve her for 5 days, not letting her drink a single drop of water. He wanted her to call him master. She had always rolled her eyes at him, stubbornly refusing to submit to this title. At that time, her 4 limbs were completely immobile, and after 5 days, not only was she almost out of shape, she was so dirty that her original appearance was almost unrecognizable. When she thought of this, Xiao Mu shuddered deeply. When he thought of her and came over, she was struggling to use her head to tap the ground, just like a dirty loach, slowly crawling in a sullen manner. She wanted to die. She didn't want to live like this. However, at that time, even death seemed like an extravagant hope. He only needed to lift a finger to obstruct her, and everything would become meaningless. She really didn't care for this kind of humiliating life, but death was so difficult. Now, it would never be like this again. It wouldn't. That year, he had been so desperate, and yet he still couldn't tame her. Now, he wanted to order her around and teach her how to behave. In his dreams of 1,000 years, "I told you to stop. Didn't you hear me?" Kai Wei shouted. Seeing that the little girl didn't respond, she couldn't help but get angry and anxious. She rushed forward and stretched out a hand to grab her. Arbor reflexively swung his fist, and with a bang, it heavily smashed onto Kai Wei's deformed little face. Kai Wei covered her red and swollen left eye, and when she brought Arbor back to Blue Mountain Courtyard, it was almost dusk. The courtyard was full of orioles and swallows gathered there, eating melon seeds and chatting. When they saw Kai Wei enter, they hurriedly greeted her with smiles. "Sister Kai Wei, you're back." "Hello, Sister Kai Wei." "Sister Kai Wei, you're back so late today." Blue Mountain Courtyard was in charge of all the maidservants in the outer courtyard of the Qin estate. Kai Wei could be considered an old member of the Qin estate. She was about 25 or 26 years old, and was now the assistant steward of Blue Mountain Courtyard. Above her, there was also a senior steward. When the crowd saw Kai Wei put down her hand, revealing a panda eye, they could not help but look at each other in dismay. In the Qin estate, apart from the personal maidservants of the master, madam, and young master, almost all the other maidservants were respectful to Sister Kai Wei, who was so audacious. Sister Tsai Wei's eyes were swollen. Kai Wei did not utter a word. She only turned to Arbor with a gloomy face and said, "You'll be staying in the third room in the second row on the north side." Everyone's gazes uniformly turned towards the stoic-faced little girl, their eyes carrying a mischievous smile, as if they were watching a show. Arbor didn't waste any time. He took his card and walked towards his residence. He didn't walk far before he stopped and glanced back. "Come out." A plump figure jogged over. It was the fat girl who had entered the residence with her on the same day. You're really going to that room?" The fat girl looked at her in horror. "HM?" The fat girl hastily ran over and stood still before panting. "They said that there are strange noises coming from the third room in the second row on the north side every night. They said that a maidservant hung herself in that room before, so it's very likely that it's haunted." "Oh." The little girl nodded. "Thank you for telling me. You're not scared?" The fat girl stared. Chapter 508. Arbor shook her head. She even had the courage to face the holy water sect again, with its desolation and rubble. There was nothing in this world that could make her afraid. "And my name is Xiang Yuan Yuan. What about you, little sister?" The chubby girl revealed a simple and honest smile as she looked eagerly at this little girl, who looked very ordinary, but had a pair of extremely cold and beautiful eyes. "Mu Xiao Bao," Arbor said softly. "Oh, you're called Xiao Bao." Xiang Yuan Yuan cracked a smile. Then you live alone in that haunted house. If you're scared in the middle of the night, you can come find me. I live in the fourth room in the row in front of your room." Xiang Yuan Yuan scratched her head as she said this and chuckled. "We have 4 sisters in the room, and they're all quite easy to talk to. If you're scared and sneak over to us in the middle of the night, no one will tell on you to Sister Kai Wei." Arbor nodded slightly, indicating that she understood. Xiang Yuan Yuan pointed in the direction of her room. Then I'll go back first." "Oh, right. Dinner is at the dining hall, so don't come too late. If you come too late, there won't be any food." "Thank you for the reminder," Arbor responded, and the two of them went back to their rooms. Of the 4 rooms in the second row in the north, the 3 on the left and right were empty utility rooms, and only the third room was for her to use. It seemed like that whatever ghost caused all the rooms in this row to be deserted. When she opened the door, darling Xiao nearly fainted from the musty smell. How long had it been since someone lived here? They wanted her to live in such a shabby room? Humph! These people wanted to harm her and make her stay in this room with bad air for a long time. She wouldn't do as they wished. After closing the door, Arbor had the sapling drag her into Paradise Planet and personally ran to the vegetable field to pick 2 cabbages. She planned to cook a cabbage pot and make do with a meal. Master, put down the pot in your hand. Let me do it." The little tray ant ran over and shouted loudly. Last time, when Master cooked noodles, not only did the bottom of the pot get cooked through, but the peach forest was also filled with smoke. The sapling was so scared that it thought a fire was about to break out. Master clearly had the all-purpose food box that contained many dishes from various restaurants, but she liked to cook by herself. How intoxicating! However, there was one time when Xiao clearly heard its master muttering to himself as he held the small pot and asked what he should cook every day. Only then would it feel a little smoky that his heart instantly ached for Xiao. Master was missing home. At this moment, Arbor chuckled. Knowing that he was in the wrong, he threw down the small pot in his hand. Xiao was much more pleasing to the eye now. It could cultivate medicinal herbs, plant vegetables, harvest vegetables, and pick fruits. Now it could even cook a simple pot of stew. It was indeed useful. It was better than her piercing the bottom of the pot. Sigh. In the past, when she saw her mother and Xiao Yao cook, they could simply casually make several dishes. It felt especially difficult in her hands. She ran to the open space behind the peach forest. The sapling had built 3 large warehouses there. One was for medicinal herbs, another was for vegetables harvested from the field, and the last was for peaches. In front of the warehouse, there were 2 carriages full of fruits. This was the first time Second Uncle had used her guide fee to bring back things. Until now, they had only eaten a few fruits, and the 2 carriages were still full. Arbor went forward and took a bunch of grapes. She cut 20 to 30 of them and threw them into a small basket. Just as she was about to wash them by the lake, she stopped in her tracks. Chapter 509. She tilted her small head and looked at her palm. With a thought, a clear and lustrous stream of water emerged from her fingers. The little water child, Dien, said that with her current cultivation, it wasn't a big problem for her to control a trickle of water under normal circumstances. If she wanted to launch a big move like the one she tried last time, she would need to mobilize all the mystic energy in her body. She would probably only be able to launch that one move before her mystic energy was exhausted. She directly washed the grapes, and Arbor took a bite out of one. The fruit that had been stored on Paradise Planet for so long was still fresh and delicious. Compared to ordinary grapes, it was more or less mixed with a bit of mystic energy. The sweetness and coolness of the fruit went straight to the heart. Back then, when she chased the little water child away, she had cried until the world shook and gods wept. Her tears flowed endlessly, so the water quality of the entire Paradise Planet was completely improved by the little water child, that as a result, all the peach trees planted by the lakeside all bore peaches, and each one was bigger and juicier than the other. In these 2 years, the peach trees bore several batches of fruit, which were all plucked by the little treants and stuffed into the storehouse. Last time, Chocho even complained that there were so many peaches in the storehouse that it almost couldn't hold them all. But it made sense. The total area of the peach trees on her Paradise Planet was probably close to 100 mu. They grew especially exuberantly near water sources. Chocho even built a large storehouse. If they were outside, the storehouse would probably be full after one harvest. However, there weren't too many types of medicinal herbs, and the entire storehouse wasn't even filled with 1/5 of them. Arbor ate and ate as she strolled to her own medicinal garden. After inspecting it, she saw that all kinds of medicinal herbs were thriving in the 7 to 8 mu of medicinal fields. She had gathered all the poisonous herbs together to prevent them from touching the others and spoiling their medicinal properties. However, there were still too few precious medicinal herbs, so there really weren't many kinds of medicinal powders and liquids that she could grind and bring out. The green radish poison liquid and the green radish pill were considered one kind. The detoxification pill was also pretty good. Normal poisons were basically cured immediately. There was a relatively rare medicinal pill that she made from longevity flowers, the longevity pill. Based on her conjecture, if mystic cultivators below level 10 consumed it, their lifespan would increase by at least 2 to 3 years. However, this longevity pill could only be taken once. It would be ineffective even if it was taken more than once. If it was taken over a long period of time, it would at most help to recuperate one's body. It would allow one to be completely free of illness and pain for a period of time. Speaking of which, the medicinal properties were quite impressive. If she encountered a level 9 mystic cultivator who was stuck at a bottleneck, she would be able to break through to become a great level 10 mystic cultivator in 2 or 3 years by relying on this pill. In that case, the upper limit of his lifespan of close to 100 years would be completely raised. As long as a great level 10 mystic cultivator didn't court death, it wouldn't be a problem for them to live for at least 120 to 130 years. The lifespan of an ordinary person was only 70 to 80 years, which was already considered a long lifespan. Most importantly, Arbor's longevity pill was effective even for ordinary people. Arbor was in a state of seclusion. In her previous life, she had also heard that there were different grades of alchemists, and the quality of the pills they produced was also very different. He just didn't know what grade of pill the longevity pill in her hand was. Last time, when she had Qingluan try it, that fellow's eyes lit up after eating it, and only told her that the taste was pretty good. Was she asking how it tasted? What a baffling fellow. Chapter 510. The other type was the hemostatic ointment, made from the hemostatic grass grown from the hemostatic grass that second uncle gave her. However, her hemostatic ointment was different from the one sold on the market. The hemostatic ointment on the market required about 5 minutes to completely stop the bleeding. Her ointment could basically stop the bleeding in minutes. The effect was basically similar to the secret ointment that the crown prince applied on her hand when she first met him. In fact, the effect was even better. However, she was too lazy to make it, so she only tried making 2 small jars of this hemostatic ointment and was unwilling to make it. As for the other types of medicinal powders, she had used stone medicine rollers to make them, but she only made 2 types. Moreover, their effects were only ordinary poisonous powders that were effective on mystic cultivators level 6 or level 7 and below. She couldn't even be bothered to name them. In her current opinion, this kind of poisonous powder was basically not very effective. Her current opponents were all great mystic cultivators level 10 and above, so it was a waste of effort to make them. To put it bluntly, it was still because there were too few medicinal herbs. Only 7 to 8 mu of medicinal herbs were planted in the 30 mu of medicinal fields, not even 1/3 of the total. After returning from her inspection, she felt quite satisfied with everything. She then went back to the treehouse and fed the little white squirrel a few mouthfuls of life-prolonging medicinal liquid. After hugging it for a while, she turned back to the peach forest. This life-prolonging medicinal liquid could guarantee that Chirpy would not lack vitality for 2 to 3 days. Even if it was not depleted, it would not affect its little life. Her pitiful little squirrel didn't even know when it would wake up. When she returned to the open space in front of the peach forest, she saw the little Tran holding a medium-sized pot of cabbage and meat slices and bouncing toward her. Looking at the steaming pot of cabbage and meat slices, Arbor subconsciously sniffed. Her eyes flickered slightly, and she quickly jogged to Chio-Chio. She reached out to pick it up and took the pot in passing. "Thank you, Chio-Chio. Thank you for always being so tolerant and accompanying me. You are an indispensable companion in my life." "Master, what are you saying? There's no need to thank me for such a small matter." Chio-Chio blinked its black beady eyes and looked at her adorably. The corners of Arbor's mouth twitched slightly. He had already sat down cross-legged, picked up 2 bamboo chopsticks, and started eating in small bites. Actually, she didn't eat much. How could one person finish an entire pot of food? However, she liked the smell of cooking on this paradise planet. She liked to see the smoke rising from the kitchen. It was as if home was right in front of her. "Master, is it delicious?" "It's delicious." Arbor nodded. He didn't say that Chio-Chio had forgotten to add salt again. Well, it was better than her boiling through the bottom of the pot. "Master, someone is coming." Chio-Chio's perception had improved quite a bit, so she could immediately detect any danger approaching within a few kilometers. Arbor sneered and put 2 pieces of meat into his mouth with his chopsticks. "Don't worry about it. Let them be." Not even 1/3 of the pot of cabbage and meat was finished. Darling Chow couldn't bear to throw away the rest. It was shameful to waste food, since it wouldn't spoil in the paradise. He closed the lid and climbed into the treehouse. He hugged the little white squirrel and slept soundly. The next day, when Omega Kotoku received news that a group of rooms in Blue Mountain Courtyard had caught fire and a maid had been burned to death, her heart couldn't help but skip a beat. She hurriedly rushed to Blue Mountain Courtyard with her men and found Kai Wei to scold her. Her face darkened as she asked, "Where is she?" Chapter 511. Young Master. Kai Wei was on the verge of tears as she curtsied and said, "Kai Wei doesn't know what happened. Everything was fine last night. Let me ask you, where is the Xiao Bao that I asked you to bring over to educate yesterday?" Kai Wei's face was pale, and her body was on the verge of collapsing. She was in a state where she was on the verge of fainting. With a thump, she knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed as she begged for mercy. This servant had Mu Xiao Bao stay in one of the rooms in this row, but for some reason, a fire broke out last night. It's very possible that Mu Xiao Bao didn't light the candle properly and didn't even know that it caught on fire. We put out the fire with great difficulty, but we didn't see Mu Xiao Bao at all. I don't know if she slept like a log last night and didn't come out. Now it's burnt to ashes. Kai Wei's voice became softer and softer, as if she didn't dare to look at the second young master's murderous gaze. I asked you to bring her back to educate her. You actually caused her to disappear. Omega Katoka flew into a rage and kicked Kai Wei's shoulder. Kai Wei screamed and suddenly fell to the ground. She felt as if the bones in her shoulder had been shattered, and the pain caused her tears to flow out. She was really wronged to death. She had brought the little girl back from the second young master's place and suffered a punch from the little girl the moment she stepped out of the door. She wanted revenge and purposely arranged for her to stay in this remote and haunted room. But she had never thought of burning her to death. Although her heart was filled with jealousy, she knew that the second young master valued this girl. She wasn't an idiot and already knew that the second young master had kicked the girl over to her side to educate her in a fit of anger. He would definitely bring her back 2 days later. Even if she had 10 times the guts, she wouldn't dare to secretly kill the little girl. Elder sister, why did you make the second young master so angry? You really shouldn't have done that. A soft chuckle sounded in his ears. He saw a well-developed woman around the age of 20 walking over slowly behind an old woman with a head full of white hair who was walking at a fast pace. When Kai Wei saw her face, she immediately understood everything. She bared her teeth and screamed with a purple and white face. Kai Lan, you're the one who harmed me. You started the fire. Io Baba. Elder sister, don't talk nonsense. Why would I set a fire for no reason? Kylon covered her mouth and chuckled lightly. When she noticed the cold gaze her young master shot at her, she immediately didn't dare act rashly, and she knelt down with an aggrieved expression before she cried and said, Young master, you have to uphold justice for Kylon. Her sister was accusing her wrongly. How would Kylon know that her elder sister brought back a little maid last night? There's no reason to start a fire. You were the one who did it. Kai Wei shrieked. You wanted to harm me. You set the fire. You want to frame me. Shut up. Granny Hong, the chief steward of Blue Mountain Courtyard, shouted coldly. His eyes swept over Kai Wei and Kylon with a dignified look before he stepped forward and bowed to young master Omega Katoku. Please forgive me, second young master. It's this old servant who doesn't know how to teach this servant. I've troubled second young master. Omega Katoku's eyes were so gloomy that tears could drip from them. He looked at Granny Hong and said coldly, You really don't know how to teach. By today, you have to find that person even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground. Otherwise, all of you can die for me. Granny Hong's body trembled, and her gaze instantly became nervous. Kylon also widened her eyes in disbelief, practically unable to believe her own ears. Babies, I'll give you 4 chapters first. I'll give you 4 chapters tonight. The author is still working and will be home later. Moi. Chapter 512. The young master actually wanted to execute them, the Blue Mountain Courtyard stewards who had served their master for many years, for a mere lowly servant? Kylon widened her eyes in horror, and cold sweat trickled down her forehead. Why was it like this? The second young master actually cared so much about that lowly servant? What did she do wrong? Although Kylon hadn't served the second young master closely, she was extremely intelligent and had her own way of dealing with people. She understood this second young master too well. He looked like he didn't care about anything, but once he set his eyes on something, he would use any means possible to obtain it. The second young master had a trace of bigotry hidden in the depths of his bones. Right now, the second young master's bigotry was completely reflected on this lowly servant. The second young master, he wasn't joking. If they really couldn't find this lowly servant, or if the lowly servant really burned to death in this room, then only death awaited them. When she thought of this, Cylon's entire body quivered. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead like rain, and her complexion became increasingly ghastly pale. She had really made a mistake. Originally, she only wanted to use this matter to get rid of that damn woman, Kai Wei, but she didn't expect the second young master to value that lowly servant so much. This truly exceeded her expectations. Then, she heard a cold and cheerless voice interject and ask frostily, "Why are you all crowding around my door? Move aside." When this voice landed in the ears of the Blue Mountain courtyard maids, it was tantamount to the sound of nature. Kylon turned around with an incredulous expression. Yet Kai Wei abruptly turned back with tears in her eyes. When she saw the young lady dressed in the same pink-maid uniform slowly walking over, she abruptly felt that the usually arrogant, stoic-faced young lady didn't seem so repulsive at this moment. The Blue Mountain courtyard maids all sighed in relief and hastily opened up a path for Arbor to pass through. Our dear Xiao Mu walked to the gloomy second young master and cast him a glance without uttering a word. "Where did you go?" The second young master's face was filled with anger. Inexplicable. Omega Kotoku always felt that he was especially composed in the past. Even when faced with his sly brother's sarcasm, he could still turn a blind eye and turn a blind eye. But now, his good temper had been completely worn away by the stoic face. He didn't know why, but looking at the stoic face made him want to get angry. Xiao Mu harumphed and said coldly, "Is that kind of dilapidated house that exudes a musty smell for people to live in? The Qin estate can't afford to build a decent wing, so they might as well not hire so many maids. Do I look like I have such low standards? How can I live in a rundown house?" Looking at the little stoic's disdainful face, for some reason, Sir Omega Kotoku felt especially humiliated. Was his Qin estate that poor? Omega Kotoku glared coldly at the trembling Kai Wei, who was sprawled on the ground. "Go and receive your punishment on behalf of the court." A servant who acted on her own initiative. He only wanted her to teach the little stoic some etiquette on his behalf, not to torture her in terms of food and clothing. Was he, the Omega Kotoku, such a low-class person? Yes. Kai Wei scrambled and crawled away, staggering as she rolled away. She was really scared. She warned herself 10,000 times in her heart to learn from today's lesson and not offend this stoic-faced young lady again in the future. "Come with me." Omega Kotoku snapped coldly and turned to walk out of Blue Mountain courtyard. The little fellow followed after him in a huff. Before she left, she gave Xiang Yuan, who was hiding in the crowd, a look. Chapter 513. Xiang Yuan was taken aback for a moment, and without hesitation, she strode forward and followed him. Not long after the two left Blue Mountain courtyard, Arbor pulled Xiang Yuan behind a nearby bush and stared at her. "You're very hungry." Xiang Yuan was just about to shake her head when her stomach let out a disappointing rumble. That actually, even though Arbor was standing so far away earlier, she could hear Xiang Yuan's stomach rumbling with hunger. Xiang Yuan's big face was covered in a layer of red mist. In front of a little girl who was 10 years younger than her, her stomach was rumbling with hunger. Xiang Yuan was embarrassed and her face was flushed red. Arbor got Xiao to take out the steaming cabbage pot and stuffed it into Xiang Yuan's hands. "You can have it, but I've already eaten a portion of it. If you don't like it, how could she dislike it?" The aroma of the cabbage pot stimulated Xiang Yuan's big belly to rumble. She practically snatched the pot into her arms. When she looked up, her face was red as she said embarrassedly, I'll get a bowl to scoop some." "No need, you can have it all." Arbor glanced at Xiang Yuan's stomach and shook her head. "You're really giving it all to me?" Xiang Yuan's bright black eyes were filled with pleasant surprise. She then scratched her head in embarrassment and said, I went to the big dining hall last night, and it wasn't too late. I don't know why I only got half a bowl of porridge." She was so hungry that her stomach rumbled in the middle of the night. She tossed and turned and couldn't sleep well at all. "It's a bit bland. Do you want to add some salt?" No need. It's fine like this." Xiang Yuan held the cabbage pot and felt like she was holding the whole world. Her face was filled with bliss. Arbor was a little drunk. It was just a pot of cabbage stewed with meat. His happy face made her feel a little sour. The little stoic's gaze relaxed slightly. She glanced at the eldest miss and said with a nod, "Then you should hide a bit." Xiang Yuan was just an ordinary person with slightly greater strength. She didn't have an inner world. If she openly carried this cabbage pot back, who knew how many people would covet it? Arbor didn't want to cause any trouble for her, so he kindly reminded her. Xiang Yuan immediately understood and nodded. Xiang Yuan wasn't stupid. She took off her outer robe and wrapped it around the pot. After repeatedly thanking him, she happily went to find a place to eat. Arbor turned around and saw the second young master standing under a snow plum tree in full bloom not far away, looking at her with an indecipherable expression. She did not know how long he had been staring at her. He was dressed in a long blue robe and had a head full of black hair. He was truly a peerless young master. When that pair of emerald eyes looked at her, there was a trace of an indescribably strange emotion in them. She slowly walked over. Omega Katoka stared at her as she walked closer to him. Suddenly, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. "Have we met before?" he asked softly, as if he was murmuring. Arbor was greatly shaken on the inside, but she still maintained that stoic face on the surface and walked around him expressionlessly. She didn't give him a single word in response. Of course, Omega Katoku didn't need her to respond. He just treated it as if his brain had gone haywire for no reason, so she didn't hear him murmuring softly. The two of them wandered back to Crane Garden through a small path. That night, Arbor jumped out of the window and secretly snuck into Omega Katoku's study to search for some information. According to her observations these past few days, the Qin estate was a medicinal pill patrician family that was passionate about pill research. Chapter 514. The family head, Qin Guilu, spent his days in the pill-concocting room and was nowhere to be seen. The second madam, Yang Liuxiu, wasn't the two young masters' biological mother. She had been married for 5 years, but she still had a niece and nephew from the Yang family by her side. Everyone in the estate addressed her as young master cousin and young miss cousin, but she had absolutely nothing to do with the two young masters. Was Shuntian Prefecture's Lu Yiji related to the Qin estate? That day, when the old sect master dragged him into the sky and self-detonated, she detected that he hadn't died from the shattered life lantern. However, with his injuries from back then, he probably wouldn't recover without resting for a year or two. If he wasn't related to the Qin estate, why would the Qin estate's iron tablet appear in the Holy Water Sect's ancestral hall? Xiao Mu sneered and sped up the flipping speed in her hands. During the day, Omega Katoku was sitting on the side, so she couldn't do anything. Only now, "Master, someone's approaching." Chio's voice instantly rang in her mind. Arbor immediately jumped out of the window and nimbly and soundlessly scuttled out, hiding her body in a patch of undergrowth outside. The branches and leaves of the sapling extended from her wrist, emitting a faint green light. After a few seconds, Arbor's entire body was enveloped by the rapidly growing undergrowth, concealing all of her presence. "Young master, what happened? I seem to have sensed someone here just now." Omega Katoku lit a candle. The candlelight illuminated his slightly furrowed brows. He scanned his surroundings, but didn't discover anything. His personal bodyguard sighed in relief and couldn't help but laugh. Who would dare to cause trouble at the Qin estate? "Young master, you're worrying too much. You should return early to rest." Arbor crouched below the window and couldn't help but relax when she saw Omega Katoku leave. A moment later, she nimbly flipped into the study again and methodically searched through Omega Katoku's study at an extremely fast speed. She left empty-handed with a frown. She did not directly return to her room to rest, but instead quietly left the Crane Garden. Her figure flashed nimbly in the dark night. When he arrived at a place called Fuguwei Garden, his small ears twitched slightly as he heard a woman's muffled voice coming from behind the door. Xiao Mu's eyelids twitched. She wasn't stupid. Even if she hadn't experienced anything in her previous life, she had still grown up. Even if she hadn't eaten pork, she would have unintentionally seen pigs run. Just as she was about to run away, she heard the woman snort and shout, "You damn ghost! Why are you so strong? Do you want to kill me? If by any chance I cry out and Master hears it, you'll die." A young man chuckled and said, "Annie, don't make a sound. Otherwise, neither of us will be able to escape death." Xiao Mu felt her scalp go numb when she heard this. She didn't dare to stay any longer. She felt goosebumps all over her body and hurriedly ran out. After coming out, her small body couldn't help but tremble a little. She hurriedly slipped into another courtyard. Two figures were reflected in the study. The little fellow was wrapped in trees and transformed into a little tran to hide under the window. An old man's voice could be heard from inside the room. He said vaguely, "The situation has been particularly tense recently. That person is currently searching everywhere for you. You should let your master hide for a while longer. That lunatic has been clinging on to us and refusing to let go. We have to take care of him." Another slightly familiar young voice said through gritted teeth, "Sir wishes for you to do something for us. After it's done, you definitely won't be short of benefits." Chapter 515. After that, there were a few whispers. Arbor only heard the words pill recipe and secret recipe. She couldn't hear anything else, so she couldn't help but feel a little anxious. "No way, no way. You can't implicate our Qin estate." The aged voice refused again and again. "If something happens to that person in our estate, then our entire estate won't be able to escape the blame. It'll definitely be a serious crime that will lead to the extermination of our entire family." "You're still afraid of that muddle-headed old guy? What can he do? As long as this young one is dealt with, that old one is nothing to be afraid of." "That won't do." The aged voice faintly revealed some anger. "You want to burn our Qin estate on a bonfire? I definitely can't agree to that. Family head Qin, don't forget that you and I are on the same path, tied to the same boat. If we're completely wiped out, you..." The voice in the room lowered again. Finally, the aged voice said helplessly, "Can you really guarantee that our Qin estate will be able to escape unscathed? After dealing with that person, the old one will definitely be at a loss of what to do. At that time, After another round of whispers, Arbor could only be secretly anxious. She kept feeling a trace of discomfort in the bottom of her heart, faintly feeling uncomfortable. What kind of person would secretly harm become a serious crime that would lead to the extermination of their entire family? This answer practically leapt into her mind. It was the person she had always refused to think about and didn't dare to face in these 2 years that, come to think of it, she was really a star of calamity through and through. Almost all the people who were good to her were dead. She had been conflicted for a long time before she finally decided to come out into the world. She had even decided to make a trip home. On the way back, she flipped through those letters. That kind of longing to return home urged her, and she almost wanted to run back immediately. However, the closer she was to home, the more timid she felt. Perhaps she was actually resisting going back from the bottom of her heart. It was best if she didn't go back and break the peace of her family. Even without her, her family had been living well all these years. From their letters, she could see the happiness in their hearts. This little star of calamity, was actually more suitable. It would be best if she stayed alone and didn't bother anyone. Losing something was really scary. Scary that Arbor returned to his room in the Crane Garden in an upset mood. As soon as he entered the door, he couldn't help but stagnate and take 2 steps back. A slender figure suddenly grabbed her wrist and said in a cold voice, "Where did you go for a stroll in the middle of the night?" Arbor's body stiffened. He felt as if a poisonous snake had grabbed his wrist. That hand was as cold as it was in his previous life. With a flip of his hand, Arbor quickly got rid of his hand and ruthlessly kicked over, mercilessly leaving a small footprint on the man's body. Omega Kotoku didn't retreat. He lowered his head and looked at the footprint on his leg. His eyes stared gloomily at the expressionless face under the moonlight. "Who are you? Show me your face." "Get out." Xiaomu found him annoying and kicked him again, kicking him out of the room. She then slammed the door shut and slammed it shut right in front of his face. Bang! That sound almost startled the entire crane garden. A guard in black floated over and looked at the tightly shut door in astonishment. He then looked at his second young master, who had an extremely ugly expression and couldn't help but gulp. I've been very busy these few days. I already said that I'll finish it even if it's later. But you don't have to wait for me. You can read it tomorrow. Chapter 516. The young master was given the cold shoulder for no reason. So why did he want to laugh so much? Omega Kotoku gloomily turned to glance at the black-clothed guard, only to see the guard's solemn expression. Even though he was already cramping up from laughter on the inside, the little stoic wrapped herself in the blankets and tossed and turned the entire night without sleeping well. The next day, when she went out with a yawn, she saw Omega Kotoku standing in the courtyard with a glance. It actually snowed last night. Omega Kotoku was wearing a white fox fur overcoat as he stood in the middle of the boundless snow. His fine black hair was splashed with ink, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. When he turned to look at her, it was as if a lifetime had passed. This person couldn't have been standing in the corridor the entire night after he kicked her out, right? Was there something wrong with his brain? Let's go. He took a furry fur overcoat from the guard beside him and wanted to drape it over her. However, the little stoic didn't appreciate his kindness and evaded to the side, looking at him vigilantly. He glanced at her and actually didn't get angry. He handed the fur overcoat to her and let her drape it over herself. The weather was indeed quite cold, so she simply draped it over herself and tied a knot on the silk sash at the collar. It was already nearing the new year, and the Chin estate was also busy with business, so she didn't know where this second young master wanted to take her. Last night, she was actually unreasonable. At that time, her mood was in a mess, and she even flew into a rage out of humiliation, so she unreasonably kicked this second young master out the door. If it was any other young master, they would probably drag this audacious maidservant out and beat her to death. He had clearly already exposed her identity and even saw through her disguise. But why didn't he say anything today and continue to keep her by his side? Arbor couldn't figure it out and followed him to a pavilion with thick cotton curtains hanging on it. As soon as they entered, they felt a warmth hit them in the face. The charcoal inside the stove was burning red. The maidservants obediently took the fur coats from the two and led them to the window on the second floor. There were already many exquisite pastries and food on the small table. This should be a sumptuous breakfast. The two of them ate breakfast in silence. Arbor felt that she had a good appetite, but Omega Kotoku, who was sitting opposite her, kept looking at her with a frown. Eat more. The second young master rolled up his wide sleeves and picked up his chopsticks to give the little stoic another piece of pastry. This scene made the maids who were secretly observing them drop their chins one after another. They secretly lowered their heads and couldn't help but peep at them from the corner of their eyes. Heavens, young master actually picked up food for that little maid? Just what kind of divine being was this little maid? How could she have such great fortune? No matter how they looked, that girl was wearing the same pink dress as them. No one would believe that she wasn't a maid. However, an even more horrifying scene unfolded before their eyes. The little stoic picked up that pastry touched by Omega Kotoku and directly threw it on the table. She pursed her lips in displeasure. I'm full. The maidservants were afraid that the young master would fly into a rage the next instant and hastily knelt down. Omega Kotoku picked up another piece of sugar pastry and placed it on her small plate, but it was thrown away by the little girl again. Omega Kotoku picked up all the food and realized that the little girl didn't eat a single bite. He guessed that she really was full, so he finally stopped. However, the maidservants around him were so frightened that they trembled all over. None of them dared to look up again. Withdraw, all of you, young Master Omega Kotoku said coldly. The rustling of robes brushed against the ground, and soon, the maidservants retreated from the second floor of the pavilion one after another. Chapter 517. Let's get to know each other again. Omega Kotoku said indifferently. My name is Chin Xian. What about you? Mu Xiaobao. Even I feel a bit scared when I look at myself in the mirror expressionlessly. Omega Katoka nodded and didn't expose her fake name. He said indifferently, Xiao Bao, you don't have to be so guarded against me. My Qin estate doesn't have any shady dealings. You can stay and investigate for as long as you want. Don't worry, I won't mention this to anyone. Omega Katoka's sleeves swept across the table as he poured her a cup of tea and pushed it in front of her. Arbor looked at this Qin estate's second young master in bewilderment. She didn't know what this person was planning. Was there anything shady? Last night, your father was still plotting with someone in the middle of the night. Could it be that this Omega Katoku didn't know anything? She subconsciously wanted to hit her little head. She felt that this life was a bit strange. It was poles apart from her previous life. Many things caught her unprepared, and she didn't have time to prepare. In her previous life, she was taken away by that bastard Fanshoha when she was around 20 and tortured for 2 years. When she was 22, she was taken away by this master in front of her and followed by master for at least 4 years. She didn't know the person in front of her very well, but she was at least somewhat familiar with him. He was a stubborn person to the point of being paranoid. His character was strict. Just by looking at his methods of taming beasts, one could tell. At that time, she was even more closed off than now. She was a cripple who couldn't move her limbs. She stayed in a fixed place all day long, eating, drinking, and going to the toilet together. She didn't have the slightest bit of dignity and didn't want to care about anything else. She only knew that the place she stayed at that time wasn't the Qin estate. Moreover, she didn't know where she was at that time, but it definitely wasn't in Guanlan City. Perhaps he had already opened his own estate and lived elsewhere at that time. Now, her meeting with Omega Katoku had been brought forward by 7 or 8 years. This was an irresistible fate. The people who should meet would meet as usual. But now, her fate was completely in her own hands. No one could control it. She was not yet. Come on. Arbor held the warm teacup with both hands and glanced at the man in front of him coldly and distantly. He lowered his head slightly. The second young master's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, when he saw the little stoic's expressionless face and ice-cold eyes, he felt extremely uncomfortable in his heart. He really wanted to reach out and warm her eyes. Young master. The chief steward's voice suddenly sounded from outside the door. What is it? Regarding old master's birthday banquet, there are still some important guest lists that I need to discuss with second young master. Yes. Omega Katoka stood up and stared at the little fellow who had her head lowered. You go back to Crane Garden first. I'll be back later. As he walked out, he said lightly, It's cold on the road. Remember to put on your fur coat. Arbor raised his head and glanced out the window. He saw him coming down the stairs and leaving the pavilion. At some point in time, snow started drifting down from the sky again. The accompanying chief steward bowed respectfully and held up an umbrella for him. Arbor also stood up and walked downstairs. When she passed by the staircase, a maidservant handed her a fur coat with her head lowered. Arbor thanked her and accepted it. She casually put it on and went down the pavilion, heading outside. Chapter 5:18. A small layer of snow had accumulated on the ground from last night. With her cultivation, it was normal for her to leave no traces when she stepped on the snow. However, Arbor purposely left a row of small footprints on the snow. Each step left a small footprint that formed a crooked row. As she walked, she thought about the steward's report and didn't notice a few figures passing through a small path nearby. The Qin Estate's master's birthday banquet was on the list of important guests. Could it be that they wanted to add Prince Mo's name to it? Last night, the Qin Estate's master and that person with a somewhat familiar voice. Were they plotting against him? What methods did they plan to use to deal with him? Would the crown prince really come? He was busy with political affairs, so he shouldn't have to rush over to congratulate a mere Qin estate. She left a pair of small footprints on the snow as she thought. Even if he really came, I wouldn't let anything happen to him. The little fellow reached out to touch her small face. She had disguised her appearance, so her face was ordinary. If she was thrown into a crowd, no one would recognize her. On the day of the birthday banquet, she would probably run into many acquaintances. As long as she didn't open her mouth to speak, no one would recognize her. The little fellow was very confident in her disguise technique. When the time came, she would be completely stupefied suddenly. She heard a soft chuckle beside her ear. Arbor turned her head and saw an exceptionally fine young master wearing a dark purple robe. His long hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a cinnabar mark between his eyebrows. He was leaning against a snow plum tree with a smile on his face, looking at the small crooked footprints she had purposely left behind. "Who are you?" Arbor asked coldly with a stoic face. "Impudent." A woman's soft reprimand came from beside the young master. Only then did Xiao Mu notice that there were several young and beautiful women of all shapes and sizes following behind this man. The one who spoke was wrapped in a large red woolen cloak. Her soft breasts were half exposed, and her body was round and voluptuous. Surrounded by pearls and jade, the woman's gaze landed enviously on the precious white fox fur coat that Xiao Mu was wearing. The woman's entire body carried a storm-like aura, as if she was going to devour Xiao Mu in the next instant. "You dare to be so rude in front of eldest young master? Little bitch, why aren't you kneeling down and saluting?" Another yellow-robed woman also came out from under the flowers and trees. She glared at Arbor and criticized repeatedly. "Oh, so it was Grand Duke Qin Ziqin. No wonder there were some similarities between his features and second young master's." However, compared to the second young master's calm and collected appearance, this eldest young master Qin's eyes were alluring and contained a hint of frivolity and wickedness. He was obviously an insufferably flirtatious person. Arbor glanced at them and was about to turn around and leave when she saw eldest young master Qin's figure flash and appear beside her. He reached out to flirtatiously lift her small chin. Xiao Mu kicked him without allowing him to explain. At the same time that he reached out to grab her small foot, Xiao Mu abruptly retracted her foot. Her gaze hardened, and she backhanded his handsome face that was infuriatingly handsome. Qin Xian was caught off guard for a moment. He did not expect that a woman would actually make a move against him. He was instantly stupefied after being forcefully slapped by a little girl. The accompanying girls all screamed in shock, as if our dear Xiao Mu had done something deranged and unforgivable. Their screams nearly pierced her eardrums. "Scram!" Arbor kicked eldest young master angrily and pushed him away forcefully before turning to flee in a huff. Chapter 519. Qin Xian abruptly regained his wits, and his eyes flashed with fury as he anxiously chased after her. In less than a second, he once again blocked Arbor's path. "What? You want to run after hitting me? How can there be such a good thing?" He was so angry that his heart ached. Where did this little village girl come from? She had no manners at all. She actually dared to stage a full-on brawl and slap his face at the slightest disagreement? Preposterous. "Young master, young master." The orioles and swallows all ran over in a huff and pointed at Arbor while shouting angrily. "Noisy." Arbor turned around and sprinkled a large handful of medicinal powder at the orioles and swallows. The world suddenly quieted down. The few women raised their hands to cover their throats in horror. They only felt that after inhaling a mouthful of that poisonous powder, their throats were burning with pain. For a moment, they were completely speechless. Qin Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at Arbor. As the eldest young master of an elixir patrician family, he naturally knew a lot about medicine. He could tell at a glance that this little fellow's poison powder was pretty good and had remarkable effects. With this, the throats of the women in front of him probably wouldn't recover within 3 days, and they wouldn't be able to speak. "This little fellow is a bit interesting." Eldest young Master Qin laughed instead of getting angry. His eyes swept over her face flippantly. "How about this? How about I ask second brother to take you over? You can stay by my side from now on." The orioles and swallows around the eldest young master all widened their eyes in horror. However, none of them could make a sound at this moment and could only glare coldly and angrily at Arbor with tears in their eyes. Arbor's gaze didn't waver at all. He was as calm and tranquil as a 1,000-year-old dried-up well. He gazed at him coldly before turning to walk towards Crane Garden. Qin Xian's brows involuntarily creased. The little girl really wasn't good-tempered. Moreover, her eyes were filled with the coldness of the vicissitudes of life, which didn't match her age at all. "You all go back first." The eldest young master threw down this sentence and headed straight for Crane Garden. The orioles and swallows, who had originally happily accompanied the eldest young master to admire the plum blossoms, were all on the verge of tears as they watched the eldest young master leave without any reluctance. They secretly gritted their teeth in hatred. The red-clothed beauty draped in a sheepskin coat stared at the young master's departing figure with resentment and anger in her eyes. The second young master had a daring maidservant. Almost everyone in the residence knew about this. But seeing her today, Ping felt that this woman was not only daring, but also willful and reckless. Eldest young master looked at the little slut's amused expression, and Ping's heart instantly ached. She understood the meaning of her man's gaze too well. It was a greedy look after something fun. Ping swore that she would never let this bitch enter Drizzle Court. Absolutely not. Our dear Xiaomu was so angry that her head hurt. After running all the way back to Crane Garden, she returned to her room and shut herself in. She didn't know that eldest young master, that Deba Chi, had directly run to second young master to demand her. Of course, in the end, the two brothers parted on bad terms. This matter reached the ears of the Qin estate's second madam, Yang Liuxiu, when it was close to evening. Her niece, Yang Fengyan, ran over to complain to her while weeping. She said that the two young masters had almost come to blows in Crane Garden over a lowly servant girl. At that time, Yang Liuxiu wondered if there was something wrong with her ears. Did she hear wrongly? Aunt! Yang Fengyan snuggled into Yang Liuxiu's embrace and sobbed. Chapter 520. Yang Liuxiu gently patted her niece's back, naturally aware of her niece's feelings for the second young master. Although she also wanted to play matchmaker for them, she had done so more than once in front of the master. Unfortunately, her niece's looks were similar to the Yang family's. They weren't stunning beauties, and her talent was very ordinary. She was still a level 4 mystic cultivator, so the second young master probably wouldn't fancy her. She had married into the Qin estate 5 years ago, and not long after, she had taken in her nephew and niece, whose parents had died early, and raised them under her care. She had treated them well from the bottom of her heart. In terms of food and clothing, they were no different from the two young masters of the Qin estate. However, it was still very difficult to marry Fengyan into the Qin estate. Not to mention the second young master's heavenly looks, his vision was naturally higher than normal people's. Moreover, their Yang family had been declining day by day these past few years, and they couldn't be compared to the Qin estate at all. Other than refining pills daily, Master Qin basically didn't care about his two sons. Sometimes, she even felt that Master Qin's laissez-faire attitude toward his two sons was almost unlike how he treated his own sons. Yang Liuxiu sighed and patted her niece's hand. "Fengyan, our Yang family has been declining more and more these past 2 years. You also know that the Yang family doesn't have any promising descendants. If I hadn't helped them from time to time these past 2 years, their lives would have been even more difficult." As she spoke, she let out a long sigh. "You better be mentally prepared for the matter between you and the second young master." Yang Fengyan's eyes abruptly widened, and her tear-streaked face was filled with unwillingness and anger. "Aunt, you promised my aunt? You said that you would definitely make me marry into the Qin estate and marry second cousin." "I don't want aunt. I won't marry anyone other than second cousin in this lifetime. Aunt, you have to make a decision for me." "Aunt?" Yang Fengyan had been raised by Madame Qin Yang to have a very unruly personality. Once she heard that she couldn't get what she wanted, she naturally wouldn't give up. Yang Liuxiu's head hurt from her racket, so she could only repeatedly appease her and agree first. Then she probed, "Actually, there are so many noble young masters in the capital, so why must you hang yourself on the second young master?" Aunt heard that the Duan estate's young master was brought back. His appearance was outstanding, and his cultivation was astonishing. In fact, he was also a good choice. Moreover, he's not as unreachable as your second cousin. Although the Duan residence's young master also has the surname Duan, his father is unknown. He followed his mother into the Duan residence. The old master of the Duan clan was very fond of this grandson of his. His status in the Duan clan was not much lower than any of the legitimate young masters. There have even been rumors that the old patriarch will leave the position of patriarch to his grandson. I don't want to. Yang Fengyin jumped up and refused. What Duan manners, young master? He's just a bastard without a father. I don't want to marry such a person with no status. Her aunt must be lying to her. Who else in this world could be more elegant than her eldest cousin and second cousin? She wouldn't believe it. 5 years ago, she fell in love with second cousin at first sight. In this life, she wouldn't marry anyone other than him. Madame Qin Nei Yang saw that she had already made up her mind, so she could only nod helplessly. In a few days, many people will come to the estate for Master's birthday banquet. You have to properly warn your eldest brother not to be frivolous and stir up trouble. Don't offend the noble ladies who will be coming to the estate. Madame Qin Nei Yang had worried herself to death for her nephew, Yang Jiajin, and cleaned up quite a few messes. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.